Okay, thank you, and welcome to the Scrutiny of the Communities meeting of the Somerset Council. Before we can proceed, can I make sure that everybody can hear properly, please? This is a venue I haven't used before, so used to different forms of technology. Everybody all right?
Yeah.
Good. And everybody online can hear what I'm saying? Excellent.
Do you need to get close to the microphone?
Yeah, very close. Yeah, the members don't be here, but we do need to get right on top of the microphone. We need to make sure you are heard. The agenda pack of the papers is available on mod.gov or directly from the council website. And there was a link sent out to members, members of the public can access it from the public website. When I invite someone to speak, could they please clearly state who you are to benefit of anybody listening remotely, and also speak clearly, as I say, into the microphone. I'd like to welcome members of the public and media who are also joining us today. This meeting will be recorded and available online afterwards. And finally, as agendas are now viewed electronically, can I kindly request that members and officers refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. Thank you very much. Right, we'll start the meeting proper. I will ask Max to list the apologies, please.
We have had apologies from Councillor Blackburn, Councillor Andy Kendall, and Councillor Vice Councillor Substitute, Councillor Edric Hawks, and Councillor Pauline Howard.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dingwall, you're waving from the ether.
Yes, I just wanted to give apologies. I'm afraid of a poorly child this morning has stopped me coming in, but I will be free to join in online. So apologies for not being there in person.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Right, the minutes of the previous meeting, they have been circulated. Is everybody happy that they are an accurate record of what transpired, please?
Yeah.
Any comments? No comments? Can I have the proposer in a second of that, please? Proposer Simon Cole, second Dawn Johnson. Thank you very much. They're carried. We now move on to public question time. There are two public questions. The first one is from Parish Councillor Nick Hall, please.
Yeah.
Right, if you could speak clearly into the microphone. And it's 3 minutes, is that right? So you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Nick Hall. I'm a Pilton Parish Councillor. Today I'm speaking in a personal capacity about the effective regulation of Glastonbury Festival. Last Thursday I submitted a draft statement of questions and will summarise those key points. Our community is impacted by a number of aspects of the festival, most notably security, noise, traffic and environment. We rely on the goodwill of the operating company, Glastonbury Festival Events Limited, and enforcement of planning and licensing conditions to ensure that the impacts on our community are avoided or at least minimised. The debrief report in front of you highlights the ongoing issue of noise nuisance. Not highlighted in the main report is the fact that there were 41 complaints from 37 people for this year's festival. And the report recognises that yet again noise levels did not drop away after the main stage is finished, the so-called midnight curfew. It is disappointing that how little progress has been made. When will we actually see effective regulation of this licence? The report also concludes that additional council resources are required to prevent nuisance from external or off-site campsites. The committee should be aware that in many cases these are no longer just campsites but large-scale events in their own right with entertainment and bars. What is the council going to do to address this ongoing matter? The report specifically excludes the work undertaken by Somerset Highways. One of our concerns in the community is that there is not enough consultation about closure of public roads. How is the work of Somerset Highways reviewed by the council, if not here? There is also a realisation that changes to the event management plan are in fact minor licence variations. Moreover, the changes that relate to our community are made without any input from us. Perhaps the time has come to adopt a new consultation model in line with best practice for major events. The debrief report confirms that GFEL's annual licence fee is only £32,350. Clearly, this fee does not cover the full cost of regulating the festival. Would Somerset Council provide a breakdown of the annual regulatory costs across all departments so we can assess the size of the gap between the costs, the actual costs, and the licence fee? Shouldn't a commercial organisation pay the full costs of regulating the activity, particularly considering the council's financial emergency? So in conclusion, my simple request is that in the future, rather than putting up barriers, can we jointly seek efficient solutions to our community's concerns through proper dialogue? Thank you for the time to speak today.
Well, thank you very much for coming. We have got a report on the Glastonbury review, scrutiny report coming up, but I don't know whether anybody wishes to reply to those particular points at the moment, or whether we'll cover them later.
Dave Toll's regulatory services manager. Yeah, I can cover some of those off, but some of them will be covered in the report as well. So,
Okay, well, then if you could cover one or two of them off now, I'd be quite happy.
yeah, no, that's okay. In terms of the noise levels not dropping away over after curfew, etc., that is a piece of work that is ongoing. That is something which this year there was a minor variation put in to cover off some of those issues and to start to work towards a better solution. This year was the first year that was put in place. So obviously, first year was done on site. Some of it was successful. Some of it needs a bit more work, and there's something which will be looked at for this year, working with Glastonbury Festival and their voice consultants to look at that in terms of, is there any more improvements we can make? Is there any tweaks we can make from, say, for example, this year, actually putting it in practice on the ground this year? It's a dynamic event, so whilst there was modelling undertaken to look at it, when it actually gets onto site, there is, and music is being played and venues are open. It can sometimes, it takes a little bit of adjustment to maybe get it right. So that's something which we'll be looking at for this year. In terms of Somerset Highways, they provided some responses to those questions, and they have said that in terms of closure of public roads, extensive consultation is undertaken in accordance with how they need to consult on it. They advertise the orders as per legislation and include statutory consultation. So things like highways, road closures, etc., are being undertaken in accordance with regulations they need to do. I can cover off costs briefly now. I can wait and do that in the main report if you want.
Yeah, and when we had the pre-meeting, we were discussing the report preliminary. I think one of the things that left out to me was the cost. So I think if we could cover that in the main discussion, I think that would be helpful. Okay, I think we'll be providing a written reply.
Yeah.
So, to Mr. Hall. So, and please, I hope you're going to stay in the debate. So, okay. The next question is from Carolyn Griffiths. She's unfortunately unable to be with us today because I think she's at work. And her question, which I've been told actually spans both planning and licensing issues, will be read in full. This committee will then respond to the areas within our remit and pass any other issues on to the planning committee. Thank you. Jenny, if you read it, please.
Well, I am going to read this out now. There are clear cases of planning approval breaches in my community. There is evidence of inconsistent standards being applied. In one case, it was so-called reviewed, but not with the level of internal independence as is required by your own procedures. In another, I was told that a breach protected only to a neighbour who would not be followed up because it only affects one other property. If this is the standard applied by the council, then theoretically it means that we can all do whatever we want, provided it only affects one other household. Clearly, this would be utterly undermine any planning controls. Evidence suggests the Ombudsman is inadequately resourced to engage properly to understand referrals and to pursue further would likely require litigation. The whole point of planning is that there are rules that should be complied with, and we expect the council to require compliance. This is clearly not happening. I asked the council to carry out an independently led review of its planning compliance activity to include evaluation of consistent application of its enforcement criteria, adequacy of its own standards and criteria for enforcement, its adherence and oversight of adherence to its own standards, and whether allocation of resources are reasonable to maintain the community's compliance. This should include, but clearly not be limited to, the case histories which I will willingly provide. Can the council confirm this is undertaking to review, please? And if not, what other measure it intends to take to rectify this unsatisfactory situation? 2. I note that the council has reported changes in the noise management at Glastonbury festivals. However, despite this, yet again during 2023, there were unacceptable noise levels in the so-called curfew period experienced in the community. Can the council please help us out how this will be prevented by your monitoring and enforcement during 2024? During the 2023 festival, there was unacceptable amounts of traffic through the heart of the village, going to the so-called village car park. The reality is this car park is not a village car park. If it was, its usage would be far more modest. Car park's capacity, estimated between 1,200 and 1,800, is far in excess of that required, even if every village household drove to the festival. The licence management plan is clearly not controlling the nuisance or traffic in the community. Why is the management plan not mandating that all vehicles, except those of Pilton residents whose parking is displayed by the freeways in Pilton villages, who can not reasonably walk to the festival, park in a location that does not require access through the village? And finally, we have also been given to believe that households are denied the possibility of parking outside their own homes for the duration of the festival because of access for emergency vehicles. Yes, emergency vehicles are expected to navigate the same streets all other weeks of the year, and there are other specifically designated emergency access routes to the festival. This brings the reason for clearing these roads into question. Can the council confirm why these householders are denied the possibility of parking near their homes? Is it not connected with the Glastonbury Festival, specifically routing large amounts of traffic through the village when there are alternatives available to them that would avoid this? Why is the management plan not mandating that imposition of freeways in the village should be avoided unless it's for the benefit of the village?
Okay, Dave Cox, do you want to reply to that, or do you want to pick these things up in the report?
I can reply to a couple of questions. I've got some information from highways on two of the questions. So the first question is, why is the management plan not mandating all vehicles is displaced by freeways? That question, the answer to that is, from highways, that is what is already in place. People parking in the village are residents or guests of residents. People outside the village, parish, are parking elsewhere. Note that parish residents with guests who have no parking near their property will often park cars in the green car park for the week. That's a response from highways. Obviously, a more detailed response can be given after the meeting if needs be. The second question, can the council confirm why these householders are denied the property of parking near their homes? Response from highways is, all clearways have been implemented at the request of the village representatives of the parish council. Some, Cum Hill, Red Street, Pole Road, have been in place since the early 2000s. Top Street more recently in 2022, both as a result of community engagement and planning.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll be providing, as I say, a reply in relation to the matters that concern this committee, but some of the planning related matters that will have to be passed on to the area east planning team to respond. Okay, thank you very much. And that concludes public questions. And we are now moving on to item 5 on the agenda, which is the community services budget monitoring update. And is Christian Evans? There you are, Christian.
Sorry, I'll take this one, Christian. Yeah, so it's just an introduction. My name is Paul Travers. I'm the lead finance business partner for community services. We did do a quick slide.
A bit closer to the mic.
Sorry, yeah. I did do a quick slide, but just to do a bit of summary in terms of the position where we are, so we'll get on to the next. This is just the general fund, there is a report later on that. Go on to the next slide, please. So this gives the summary of the overall position of the council, the revenue budget as at the end of month 6. It just gives a bit of an overview in terms of what the challenges are, which we've encountered in terms of bringing 5 budgets into one. There were items such as budget errors included within all of it or some of the revenue budget. There's also ongoing work for the establishments, obviously bringing all of the establishments together. So that's taking a bit of time and a bit of work to get that into a position where it's straighter. And so it just highlights at the bottom the significant variances. This is obviously included in the report, the detail in terms of what the variances relate to and the actual issues around what they are. But we've highlighted the bigger ones. So you've got adult services, 14.9 million adverse, children's services 12.4, and climate and place 5.3. Come on to the next slide, please. That one. Thank you. This then digs into the bits around community services, so specific to it. The table on the right gives you all the details of the individual variances. We are only reporting 3 areas at this point in time. So the month 6 projection is a 1.3 million adverse variance as at the end of the year. Just an update in terms of month 5. So there is a movement of 1.3 million to positive variance projected at month 5. In terms of where they sit, there's 0.9 million in regulatory operational services. And you can see at the bottom that relates to a legacy budget issue in terms of which related to a grounds maintenance contract. And there's a small bit, so that's one of the grounds maintenance contracts, which was in the South Sunset area. The second part of it is there's a small bit around grounds maintenance contract spend, which is 0.1 million in the Mendip area. Cultural services, so just going back up, there's a 0.4 million projected variance, and that's to do with the sports facilities, so the sports centres, which we have, and it's to do with contractual income within those sports centres. The other element of it is in relation to utility costs, which is to do with the benchmarking, which is included within the contract itself. Yes, going on to the last slide. I think the final slide was around questions. I think that was all of it. So if there are any questions on any bit, please let me know. Yeah. Just get back to that. Sorry, can you just get back one slide? I think it was highlighting. Yeah, that's yes, just summarising. There was in the terms of open spaces, there's an income budget error, which we've already talked about. So that's it. Thank you.
I'm going to just add into that as well. So thanks, Paul. Just to add in, so that's the figures you can see there are just the position as of that time. So Chris and the service managers and the rest of the team are working to get to that balance back to 0. So it's not a prediction as such. It's as of that point. So we're hoping, and obviously Chris is working very hard to try and get that back into the balance by balance back to 0 by the end of the financial year.
Okay, thank you both. Chris, do you want to add something?
Yeah, if I may, so just to add to that, we're very clear that budget holders and service directors have no authority to overspend their budgets. So whilst these are forecast predictions, there's a raft of work being undertaken in year to reduce that pressure down. So that is in addition to all of the savings that are required from the council as a whole and all of the spend boards that have been put in place. So we are doing everything we can within our power to reduce those pressures down. From a service director's perspective, they will say, we believe we will get to a position of being balanced. So this is the first time we've identified an overspend on our monthly reports or forecast overspend, but there's a lot of work happening. Some of that work is transactional in the sense of the money that's being spent. Some of it is a review of where the budgets actually are. So we have brought together 5 authorities. It feels like this has been a long process, and it has, but there are still things we are identifying where the budget allocation isn't correct. So we are still finding day by day, week by week, that different parts of the organisation have got budget allocations that belong to community services. And in response, we're finding budgets in community services that belong elsewhere. So we are still rectifying that work, and that will help support bringing this down. So it's not all about stopping spending. Some of this is about allocating the correct budget in the correct place. So I just want to assure you that the service directors are doing everything in their power to bring us to a position and a future forecast where we'll be within a tolerance from your budget.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, as I think has been said, we haven't reported a significant variance up to date that I can appreciate, but as you discover more and more about and put things together, these things do come to light. I don't know whether you know or whether there's a sense this is an unusual or a usual situation when a group of councils is brought together under a unitary umbrella. I suspect it probably is. I think the thing that intrigues me both is that the variance is made up of two things. One, clearly we're spending more money than was anticipated. And the other thing is we're bringing in less money than was anticipated. And I think that one of the figures related to sports facilities or leisure centres. What I'd like to know is, particularly in terms of the income that's lower than we anticipated, is there any prospect of getting that up? And I suspect the answer to that is probably no, which means, of course, that we then need to balance the books. The rest of, well, that figure has to be made up by cuts elsewhere. So well, not cuts or reductions elsewhere, shall we say at this point. So I would just like to know what where you are with that, or if you're still cleaning the data, trying to just see out what the final figure looks like. Because I think when we had the pre-meeting, you said that the data was still being cleaned up and the figures were coming in. You just said now that that is still happening. I'm wondering when if that process is going to finish. Well, we'll ever get a sort of final figure, or whether we're just going to have to see what we can do with what we've got and what we know as we move towards the end of March. Sorry, that's a really rambling sort of question, but I suspect you're in a bit of a cat's cradle of information at the moment. So if you can give us a steer, that would be helpful.
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of the income, there are two key parts that are affecting the budget in year. One of those is a previous contract held by one of the districts where the contract was terminated and the operating costs of that contract were removed from the budget, but the income expectation was never removed. So on creation of the Somerset Council, there is a budget line in regulatory and operational services that says we will receive £791,000 per year from that contract. That contract ceased in 21-22. So that is a carryover from a previous authority where that accounting process hasn't worked its way through. I don't know why, I don't know how, but that's the situation that we're left with. And therefore Sarah's service has an expectation of that income that it cannot possibly meet from that source. What Sarah's now having to do is try and work through the service and say, well, how do we manage that in year? How do we deal with that? And the only way to deal with that is to cut down on expenditure in other locations. And the other thing we have done, Sarah has done, is put in a future budget pressure, what has so far it hasn't been accepted because it hasn't been through council yet, but it remains on the list of pressures that will go forward as part of the budget setting. So effectively, it is an anomaly within the budget. There is no way that that service can bring in that income because the contract doesn't exist. And that budget needs to be rectified to reflect that change. And that is the proposed position for next year. So in all the modelling we're doing around the future budget gap and the budget savings options and the proposals for next year, that 791 or a variant of that figure features in it. So as of next year, the budget is signed off the way we expect it to be. That won't be a pressure within community services. So that's one of them.
Yeah.
The other big one is around a grant that was given annually to Kings of Wessex Pool. It's a pool that's operated outside of the council. It's not one of our own facilities. That grant is in excess of £200,000 per year. And the previous authority, one of the districts, had always paid that, but had never factored it into their main revenue budget. They picked it up from either underspends elsewhere or reserves, separate money. So when bringing the councils together, again, this is now Ms Dawson's service director area. She has an expectation and a contract in place until 2028, where she must pay that money to Kings of Wessex. however, has no budget line for it. And that's again, one of the significant pressures that we're finding throughout this process. We again, in the same ways with the other contract, we are put in a budget pressure because there's nothing we can do about that. The council is legally obliged to pay that money until 2028. And again, if the budget goes through, as we hope it will do, that will resolve itself for next year. But as a matter that we're having to identify underspends in the year to try and bring the budget in on target. So there are two really big pressures here that are derived from the transfer of the individual budgets and the previous authorities' accounting mechanism.
Okay, I'm just wondering if I'm the only person in the room who's feeling slightly queasy at the moment. Of course, I suppose under normal circumstances, when you're bringing all those councils together, organisations together, these anomalies will pop up from time to time. For it to pop up now in the middle of a financial crisis is terrible timing. The horrible phrase, we are where we are. Certainly one of those sums was a clear mistake in the budgeting process. And I think I've asked you this question before, but I think it's worth asking again in a public forum. Where there is a clear mistake in the budgeting process, in other words, the contract simply doesn't exist, what are the options for just taking the figure out and balancing it that way, saying it should never have been there?
I'm sure an accountant will be able to more articulately explain this. However, we can't just remove it. The whole council budget is balanced on overall income and overall expenditure. Therefore, the whole council's budget setting process included £791,000 worth of contract. The only way to write that off and remove it from the accounts is to acknowledge that there is a pressure in a future year to receive that income, and effectively it becomes a cost in part of that process. So that work will happen for 2024, but as it stands today, there is no mechanism of just drawing a line through it. It's intended to be real money that helps set the council's accounts. If we don't receive that money, it's the equivalent of not being paid, and therefore all of our other expenditure is balanced on the basis of its receipt. So we are now having to reduce expenditure because we know we will not get paid that amount of money.
Yeah, but me being a simple soul, it's clearly a basic administrative error in the budget setting. And so it's I mean, if there's no way in year to resolve that, then that is, I suppose, to understate it, rather unfortunate. Christian?
Yeah, just to pick up that point, if there's any consolation, I have been through the LGR process with Dorset in 2020, so I enjoyed it so much I thought I'd do it again. But it was exactly the same. The difficulty you've got is if you bring in 5 budgets together, it's very then difficult to kind of understand some of the oddities of the decision making of the legacy councils. As Chris has already mentioned, some of it was perhaps funded by reserves or grant money, and that ran out. A lot of this decision making, it's very difficult to trace back how that's actually come out. There's a number of oddities, not just in communities, but all over. It's no consolation now, but it does become easier after you've done 12 months of a new unitary, because you've gone through budget monitoring, you've gone through the budget, you've gone through a closed down process, you understand the budgets a lot better. It's knowledge that all of the service directors and finance, obviously, I worked for Dorset County, Somerset County beforehand, and therefore I didn't have much knowledge or any knowledge of the district budget. So it's knowledge for all of us. And there are a number of oddities exactly like that, where you don't know until you've actually gone through 1 year full budget process, and then you can, as Chris has said, you correct those by putting budget pressures in or budget savings, but it does take time to do. So unfortunately, we are discovering a number of these very difficult to decide or very difficult to understand how those decisions were made. But as Chris said, we just have to live with them this year and then correct them for the 24-25 budget. Hopefully that makes sense.
I guess it does, I suppose in a way it does, help budget pressures for next year a little bit, but nonetheless, I just feel rather unsatisfied by the whole thing, because I appreciate it. There's probably not an awful lot that can be done about it. Right, we've got a couple of other members who want to speak. Andy Dingwall, please, online. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So yeah, it's kind of again on this table on page 23 of the agenda. It's in a normal year, seeing all those 0.0 variances and greens is is a really good thing. But I can't help but feel the reality is those greens are actually closer to amber, given the fact that 0 variance isn't going to cut it in the end of the year. Because we need to make significant savings on the overall budget. So I was wondering what kind of time scale there is to bring those proposed savings from the wider budget conversations to scrutiny in order for us to have a look at.
Any bit around that?
Can I just clarify, are we referring to the council's wider financial emergency in the budget savings
Yeah,
options?
I presume that the aim, and if my assumption here is wrong, please do tell me. The assumption is that the 33.8 million pounds that we've budgeted for currently in communities will have to, in order to cover the intractable overspends in adults and children's, will have to come down. So we'll have to try our best to underspend here in order to bring down that that year end figure. Is that the case, or is that not?
But I think there's a couple of things at play. So there is the in-year budget overspends. So we are identifying as a council that we are overspending to the tune of, and I forget the exact number, so I won't try and quote it today, but there is a multi-million-pound current in-year overspend, and we have put in across the authority a range of control boards to reduce expenditure and slow down, if not stop in some places, expenditure over £100 and for all vacancies or anything staff and cost related, whether it's awards, whether it's increases, whether it's agency extensions, etc. So that in terms of the in-year work, you won't see specific proposals come forward because we are just en masse across the authority trying to slow down or stop our expenditure. In terms of future savings options to contribute towards budget saving proposals, my understanding is that they will come out in full detail as part of the report for the Resources Scrutiny Committee happening on the 1st of February. So they'll be published the week prior to that in full detail, along with all of the other activity that we would normally see in terms of treasury and management, capital programme, fees and charges, and so on and so forth. So all of that will be in the public domain through the scrutiny group, 1st of February, onto executive for the 7th, and then to full council hopefully final sign off and approval on the 20th.
Okay, that makes complete sense for next year's. I'm thinking more specifically of this year's in-year overspend. So will we see the impact of our tightening of spend come through on a positive variant, negative? So underspend in the tables that we're seeing here. So if we are no longer going to recruit, let's just for example, customer service agents or fill customer service vacancies, that budgeted 6.6 million might end up being 6.4 million. Would that come through on this table that we'll see in future scrutiny so that we can keep track of where the savings are being made, and how to talk about that?
Yeah, so we would expect to see them come through this table. Obviously, our goal at the moment is to get to a 0 position, so to balance the budget down against the current forecast overspend. So exactly where those savings will land on that table on page 23 might show a variance, but our key aim at the moment is to get to a 0 position. Of course, if we can go further, we will, but 1.3 million based around effectively some inaccuracies within the budget setting process initially is significant. So if we take a saving from customer services using that example to help balance the community's portfolio, then you would see in customer services that would be a variation, a positive variation, and that would help offset an overspend elsewhere. So you would see it in that structure, yes.
Absolutely, I completely understand that. What I'm trying to get to is, as a scrutiny committee, we should be keeping an eye on what levels of service are underspending in the council, so that we can start to understand if customer services, I'm picking that as an example because I've got a long ago background in customer service. If customer services starts to underspend, we as councillors will likely start to receive we will notice that impact, because people will be complaining to us that it's taking longer to get through to people in call centres to deal with their issues. If we know that that's where that's coming from, because we can see it in the budget, then we've got, you know, a ready-made explanation. Financial emergency, we've had to had to do this. So yeah, I guess it's, I understand the structure of it. I guess I want to know when I'll start to see that level of information.
Christian?
Yeah, I would probably say, so the 18.7 million currently clearance is an overspend corporately, and that's going to be virtually impossible to fill that gap. But you're right. So in month 9, which we reported to the February committee cycle, we are hoping that the 3 boards that have been set up, the commercial board, the spend board and the establishment and recruitment board, so the decisions made by those boards should start to filter through. So there should be savings on salaries, etc., if we're not recruiting and so on. But like you say, there may well be an effect on services because of that. But a lot of those savings should be reported in the month 9. So certainly we're hoping that that variance of 18.7 corporately will go down, and obviously communities are looking at communities and so on and so forth. But also there's an overview from the LT around what savings can be made outside of that. But we're hoping through the month 9 reporting cycle, some of those boards decisions and so on will kick into the actual variance itself.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think one of the what's covered under that is that I'd just like to be clear that there is no target for reduction below budget for any of the directorates. I mean, they're all working within their own particular areas, simply to balance the books at the moment. We're not trying to rob Peter to pay Paul at this stage. But of course, any underspend to arrive at the end of the year will be banked. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Dawn Johnson.
Hi, thank you. My question was pretty much similar to Mr. Dingle's. Now that we have these boards where any spend above £100 is going to the board, I'm not clear how that's showing in a budget where things are in abeyance because of the board decision. How does that get reflected? And I think you've partially answered the question, but it's this idea of things are in abeyance because they're in a board decision situation. How is that being reflected in the budget exactly? And also, if you could answer how many decisions have been rejected by that board? What position are we in so far with things being taken to the board that are spent over £100, and how many are not being pursued because of that board scenario being set in place? And how will that be? How will we have that information? How will we know about those decisions?
Well, basically, we're trying to find what the immediate impact of these boards is on expenditure. Do we have a view on that?
Yeah, so I know that they're looking at the amount of money that's being rejected by the boards. I've seen a figure. I'm not going to quote it, but I think it was a corporate figure rather than one for community services. So we'll look at how we can report that. In terms of the underspend, though, if we take something to board and it gets rejected, and as a result we don't spend that money, eventually that volume will grow to a figure that is material to that report on page 23. So we will start to see underspends filter through. So your monitoring of it and the underspends will come through that format. I think that's the simplest answer I can give you. I don't have a view as to how much is being rejected by either value or percentage overall for community services. I think Chris has just reminded me effectively the work is done almost before you get to the board. If you don't think it's going to be approved because it's not essential, it's not urgent, it's not statutory, it's not health and safety requirement, we don't bother taking it to the board. There's no point. We know it's going to be rejected. So there's a whole lot of stuff that doesn't get to the board because we're effectively self-policing.
So as a follow-up, basically, anything that's in the budget, you're pretty confident will be staying in the budget because you believe its due process has already happened for it to be reflected in the budget.
Yes, but we need to be clear that this is still an emerging picture. Last time we brought a report to you, we weren't predicting an overspend. This time we've got a forecast overspend. We're doing a whole lot of work to bring that down. So it's a constantly fluctuating picture, but we are bringing you the best available data at that point in time.
Yeah, I think it's about that extra layer of information so that we can get some view as to where the budget is shifting, and what is shifting within the budgets.
We won't be taking the budgets out per se. I think some of this is prevention, as is fed back. That, you know, there is a number of feedback where the people are saying, actually, we're not going to go forward because we know will be agreed. So you can't really monitor that. However, so for example, I attend the Establishment Recruitment Board. So where vacancies are requested, finance first have to sign off. If there is a budget available for that post, originally, HR also have to sign that budget off, that request off. Service directors also have to sign that off to actually get to the board. And when they get to the board, for example, if someone wants to recruit permanently, it's then challenged. You know, are that team, for example, going through a restructure? So could we instead perhaps appoint a fixed term rather than necessarily permanently until the restructure has gone through? So those type of questions that are asked, and it's quite a tight board to be fair. Could we appoint agency? Could we, you know, there's all sorts of different options where we're saying, no, we'll hold that because we know we're going through a restructure and therefore we can't approve it at this point. So we are going through a process of trying to track those savings and what the difference would be from those boards. It's not an exact science because some of it is around prevention because people may not go to the board knowing full well they'd probably be not agreed anyway. So as Chris said, it's very difficult to give you an exact figure. And we are trying to come up with a process where the decisions made are quantified. But again, that would be the exact figure either, but it just gives some indication of how the boards are working. So I'm also attend the commercial and procurement boards, so any new contracts which come forward, they are reviewed. Should we be purchasing big equipment now? Should we wait for 12 months? You know, all of those challenges are coming forward. So it's very difficult to quantify. Some of it is about deferment as well of cost. So there's a whole raft of different ways of recording how we record that information. But it's not exact science, but we are trying to come up with something. If we do manage to come up with something, obviously then we will let you know what that is. But the whole process should be saving money anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a very specific case where I know something's gone to the procurement board in my patch, and it's, you know, part of the question is how will I know how that decision, if, you know, I'm very hopeful that given that we've waited for this thing to happen for a long time, it would still happen. If that decision should be overturned, how would that be shown? How would that be reflected?
It would go back to the person who obviously put the request forward, including the service director, and then they would have to communicate that, whether it was or wasn't agreed, or they'd be against it. I guess that's probably the best way of saying it.
There is an appeals process.
Well, I'd say there's an appeal process. I don't think that's huge much because it shouldn't need an appeal process. The board should be deciding because there's such a wide variety of people on that board with that challenge. I don't know of any appeals, to be honest. I'm just saying that could happen, but I would say the board's decision is probably fine.
Thank you.
I think that the problem for me is that looking to next year and this year, we're in a way looking at two different things which are inextricably interlinked. So at the moment, we've got a budget pressure of 18.7 million, which we're beavering away to try and close the gap on. We've got 6 months of figures to do that, but actually we won't know what the impact of that work has been probably till what, late May, June? Will we know what the overspend or the final figure is for this year?
The final spend will be towards the end of May, but I think it's broken, so I'll try and speak a bit louder. Yes, the end of May is when we get a good indication of what the closure of accounts figures are. But it should be filtering through into the budget monitoring process.
In month 9, hopefully some of that, not all of it, but some of it.
Yeah, I mean, it is a movable feast. The problem is that for this council, we actually have to set a balanced budget by the end of February, is that right? And not having, 100% certainty on what the final figure is going to be for this year it makes it increasingly tricky. I just wondered, in your view, how close we're likely to get to being certain that budget for next year won't be short, or, well, if we finally claw back the 18 million, we'll be quitting, but on the assumption that these things are still moving, and as Chris was saying earlier, there are still things coming to light. Is there, and I don't want to press you on this, but I mean, can you give us or what level of certainty can you give us, shall we say?
As high a level as possible. The difficulty we've got, budget monitoring is a prediction. We don't know how bad the winter is going to be in January and February, so we can only do as of whatever point we know. So there's lots of different factors. So we don't know what the actual figure is until the end of May, but everyone's doing whatever they can as it is now to try and predict what it's going to be as of the end of March. But it's not an exact science. It's just the knowledge that you've got and what you expect future income expenditure to be towards the end of the year. So sorry, I can't give you a definitive answer. It is a prediction. It's currently 18.7 million. Everyone is working to get that figure down. It's going to be virtually impossible to get that 18.7 million down. We will be using reserves to fund that at the end of the year. At the moment, we're still working on what that will be. It should be clear in month 9. As we get further on into the year, we're more certain of what the figure will be. But until the end of March, we won't necessarily know.
Yeah, I mean, I only ask because we all go to parish council meetings. Parish councils are clearly spooked by the whole situation. The implication is that they will have to put money aside to pay for some of the services and some of the communities that this particular scrutiny committee looks after, and they don't know, and they have to set their precepts before we do. So trying to get some sort of steer. We had a local community network last night, and one of the things that came out was, just give us some clarity on what the costs are likely to be and what the implications are. But I mean, as you say, it doesn't seem, I think it would probably be unwise at this point to make any statements that could be regarded as remotely definitive. But the earlier we can move to some sort of finalised position, the better it will be. Thank you for that. Now, I've had a couple of members whose hands have been raising hands. Elizabeth Dawson, you did put your hand up. Has your point been answered?
Yeah, I think we covered the point. It was just to say if there was any more clarity that was needed on any of the leisure contracts, I am here to answer those questions, but I think Chris Hall spoke to it.
Okay, thank you. I've got Council Liz Lation, who's the financial lead. Liz?
And thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a really obvious point, which is that to have LGR coming at the same time as the new finance system, and now we've got Solver, which is an interface with Microsoft Dynamics, which is giving us these better figures for budget monitoring. And then those two would have been enough, but for those to come at the time of a financial emergency is really stretching all of our teams and all of our capability. But we do have an extraordinary audit meeting tomorrow, at which the Chair of Audit has been asking for assurance on the actions being taken. And that is, in my opinion, a good agenda and should give assurance to those asking the questions about how the situation is being managed. But I think I heard from Jason Vaughan, and maybe Christian Evans can confirm, when Dorset went to one council, they didn't have any budget monitoring until month 6, which is what we've been looking at. That's where the 18.7 million projected overspend figure comes from. We will now have month 7 and soon month 8. But more and more is coming out as budget holders are now able to have their figures via Solver. And I know from having been a budget holder in the public sector myself, that, particularly where you've got earned income as well as expenditure, that you do need to be able to monitor it all the time. And I do understand why some of the budget holders have found the first 6 months of this year particularly challenging in a new job, working with people they hadn't worked with before, and without those monthly budget monitoring figures coming forward. I'm not terribly sure how it could be more difficult, but I had attended a briefing recently on the implementation of Microsoft Dynamics and now Solver and all the other interfaces coming into MSD. And I certainly felt more assured after that briefing that work was now really well underway. And I hope that the next months coming forward, all the scrutinies, particularly resources scrutiny, will have more information and be able to track the figures more accurately and more carefully. I understand it's difficult and figures keep moving all the time, and I've been out to LCNs and parish meetings explaining that. I do find the more I try to explain, perhaps it helps a bit, but you can't talk to all 571,000 people in Somerset, even if they wanted to listen. It is difficult, and I do appreciate that information is going out at different times and people are hearing it and reading it at different times. Do appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Liz. I've got Susanna Hart.
Hello. I just wanted to ask, it seems to me it's 1.3 now that we as communities have as an extra deficit. Is that number included in the 18.7? At the moment, it is included, okay. And also, so it feels like £900 million of that is due to discrepancies out of our control, kind of things that have come out of the woodwork that shouldn't really have been as they now are. This might not be the appropriate place to ask that question, but as I'm here, and you may not know the answer, do you know what the global figure is for discrepancies that have kind of appeared from these 5 legacy councils?
It doesn't.
Thank you.
It won't affect adults and children's because their budgets are carried on as they were, because obviously that was the county function. They haven't changed. It's when you bring the 5 legacy district and county councils in communities area, in the climate place area, the central services area, and it's those areas that got the alcohol oddities. But yeah, I haven't got a figure as to what they actually are, but as Chris says, unfortunately this year everyone has to live with those because it's very difficult to trace decision making around those. And then when we set the budget for 24-25, we've got a lot more knowledge, and so those areas of oddities, the teams will be putting pressures through or trying to reduce the expenditure or increase income. But next year's budget is easier because we won't have those in it because we didn't identify them this year. But I haven't got a figure on what those are across the services. Sorry.
Okay, thank you anyway.
Well, hopefully, some of those anomalies being squeezed out may just help the bottom line a bit. So we'll have to see. Right, are there any other members online or in the room who'd like to speak? The issues for consideration by the committee are: if there are any general comments or observations that we would wish to make to the executive on the reports, or if the actions set out in the report are appropriate, if there are any further actions we would wish to see included. And I think we've given the report a fairly good examination. I haven't picked up on any suggestions of anything else that could be done. So if everybody's happy, I will move on. We'll close this item and move on to the next agenda item, which is the Glastonbury Festival Scrutiny Report. Dave Toll, I think, is going to give us.
Yeah, I'll give you a run through the report. Just before we start, I've got some colleagues with me today. It's quite a wide area of expertise. So we've got things like noise nuisance, licensing, public health issues and health and safety, etc. So I've got a number of colleagues. I've got Jack Godley from licensing lead, Matt Cloak and Richard Allen, who are the sort of noise nuisance leads, and Marietta Gill, who is the lead on various areas of the festival, including health and safety, food safety, etc., and also oversees a lot of the preparations and the actual running of the monitoring side of the festival. So they're here for any sort of technical questions that I may not know the answers to. So if I start with the report, I'll go through the report briefly, and then if there's any questions at the end, we'll try and answer them. So the report provides an overview of the monitoring work carried out by regulatory services for the Glastonbury Festival, and the monitoring undertaken is to ensure, in the main, that the licensing conditions on the premises licence are being adhered to. And also, there's various other monitoring undertaken slightly outside the scope of the licensing, which covers other statutory functions like private water supplies. There's a large private water distribution system on site, and also things to do with food safety, etc. Where there's a lot of food establishments on site, and some of those need inspected whilst they're on site. Monitoring functions, there's a range of functions, so things like the alcohol and taxi provision are part of the licensing requirements. Food hygiene, health and safety, structural safety, so building control officers sometimes assist in those inspections to make sure that the stages are constructed correctly. There's security teams that check obviously the work, the security side of things to make sure that those issues are being ticked off. And things to do, like I say, private water supplies, and also nuisance prevention. So it's obviously a music festival, so you're going to get a significant amount of people on site and events going on site. So it needs to make sure that those are controlled properly and within the scope of the licence conditions. Just to make it clear, the report really only deals with the regulatory services side of things, so environmental health and licensing functions. I have got a little bit of information on costs for other services. So if you look at fees and costs, which is section 1.3, so there is a licence fee for which the council obviously gets for issuing a licence to Glastonbury Festival. That is currently £32,350. Now that licence fee is set. It's not something we can decide ourselves. We can't say we want to get £50,000. It's calculated by there's a formula in the regulations that relates to the rateable value of the premises, and then coupled with a multiplier, I suppose, for the number of people on site. So that level of income is set for the licence. There are obviously costs associated with monitoring the event. In the environmental health and regulatory services, those are £18,000 for this year, and those costs cover officers on site throughout the course of the event, monitoring the various functions, and ensuring that licence conditions, etc., are being adhered to. There's also a small equipment budget of £8,700, which is used for buying equipment, etc., and also for there are some vehicles that are needed for some of the teams to be able to get around the site, or for example, the nuisance noise monitoring teams go out to the surrounding area outside the festival site, trying to take noise monitoring to make sure that things are being controlled. There was a question about highways costs, or the cost of the wider organisation. I've been in contact with highways for the event, and they've come back and said that the cost of things like signing, the traffic lights, all the various pieces of equipment that are out on the roadsides to redirect traffic and to control traffic, those are all funded directly by Glastonbury Festival, so there is no cost associated there. And the time that the officers are on site monitoring the event, those hours are also paid for by Glastonbury Festival. So in terms of highways, there is no cost of monitoring the festival or providing equipment, etc. to it. There are other teams that are on site as well. So there is a public health team that goes on there, and also there is part of the festival a civil contingency officer that will be there in case that there is an emergency planning incident. Those two roles are statutory, and they're based on, I suppose, a risk of what the events or the risks posed by the event. It's obviously a very large-scale event, over 200,000 people on site. So the risk that they have decided is that they need to have someone there in case of an incident or in case of a public health issue. While officers are there, they can also undertake work remotely. So if there is, for example, civil contingencies, there isn't an incident ongoing, they can undertake their normal workloads whilst on site through remote work. So that's a look at the actual costs at the moment. The only thing that's not included in there, I suppose, is preparation costs, where we have obviously there's a lot of preparation involved in the festival. There's a lot of plans that come in that need to be looked at, and those costs are, I suppose, absorbed by the service in the fact that it's part of people's day-to-day jobs of looking at that as part of the license, issuing the license, etc. So those costs at the moment aren't unable to account for those. They've not previously been recorded, but obviously that's something that we can look at in future events as we go forward. So that's going on to the next point, that in run up to this event. So this year we are operating as one authority. Last year, the preparation phase has been undertaken by Marietta and the team at Mended, because the preparation starts about now. So it was still almost operating a two-tier system. This year it's the first year where we will be operating as one local authority. So there will be a bit of work undertaken now in our one local authority to see in the preparation phase, is there any areas where we can identify, I suppose, efficiencies? Is there areas where we can now we've got, say, a bigger resource across the districts or across the county, is there anything differently which might be able to save costs, or I'd like to say bring efficiencies to our monitoring? So that's covered off the cost side of things. So issues for consideration in the report, section 2, is just to read to note report to support the officer's recommendations and to request a written response from Glastonbury Festival, the licensee, on any of the recommendations that are made. I'll give you a little bit of background to the licensing regime. So the licence covers one event per year, and the licence is for up to 210,000 people on site. As I said earlier, it's a significant event, a significant, I suppose, international event. It's on, internationally on television, etc. So it is a large event that needs to be monitored correctly. When we're considering the licence and issuing a licence, and this is obviously a thing that runs throughout the whole process, and obviously in terms of the monitoring and licence conditions, is that they need to, the licensee basically needs to make sure that they are complying, I suppose, or promoting the licensing objectives. So the 4 licensing objectives, and the licensing objectives are prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, prevention of public nuisance, and protection of children from harm. So a lot of the monitoring work undertaken is to ensure that the licence and the licensee are promoting those objectives and putting measures in place to ensure that those issues are dealt with. Licence comprises operating schedule, which in effect sets out the licence conditions, and then there is something called an event management plan, which is submitted prior to the event. And that's where a lot of preparation work comes in. There's various officers, lead officers involved in that, and multi-agency groups. That the event management plan basically describes and puts in place, I suppose, plans of how they're going to meet the operating schedule and the various licensing objectives. As I said just then, there is a multi-agency group, a multi-agency partnership, a MAP group that meets and reviews and scrutinises the plans of Glastonbury Festival. And that has people obviously from Somerset Council on there, Glastonbury Festival involved in that as part of the liaison, the ambulance service, Ava Somerset Constabulary, the fire service, and there's a few more, but I won't go through the whole list. In terms of this year's event in 2023, again, various staff were involved in the plan and monitoring of the event, and mainly those staff who are involved in health and licensing, as I said earlier, to monitor to ensure compliance with licence conditions. There are other areas, other teams on site, again, highways, and other, I suppose, parts of the council involved in the event. Sometimes, for example, legal services, if there's any issues to do with legal services or legal issues to do with the licence, etc. And obviously, enforcement officers are brought in to do some of the monitoring from other teams within the wider environmental health team. notes here. So this year, the festival overall was very well run, and the majority of the recommendations from the 2022 Scrutiny Committee and debrief were implemented. There's still some obviously work that needs to be done, I suppose, on continuous improvement. This is the sort of, like I said earlier, it's a festival which, or an event which is continually evolving. It's a lot of I suppose areas that can change and input into how it works. So there's a fair bit of work that needs to be done continuously to improve it. So as things change, to make sure that the licensing conditions are still being met. Last year, the priority improvements for this year's event were noise. I mean, there was quite a few different smaller recommendations, but the priority ones were noise. So to introduce measures to address noise and low frequency noise. And modelling was undertaken by Glastonbury. A minor variation was put in to control low frequency noise and to protect controls into low frequency noise. And there was also processes put in place to try and achieve stepped reduction in noise from the closure of the main events or main stages, so that the noise reduced over a period of time to a lower level. There was also a recommendation in relation to densities of staff and in the density of people and staff in the former camping area. I think that had been raised as an issue last year. Additional campsite management staff were put in there, and there were some changes, I think, to some of the layouts of the sites, and some areas there cars were taken out of the mix to create a bit more space. And the third priority was for exploring improvements to crowd distribution across the site. And some areas were redesigned. So, for example, a place called Williams Green was removed, replaced with something called Carhenge, which was I think an area where people could potentially, there was more space, people could relax in that area. And there was also redesigns of other areas and egress and access ways. In terms of, I think the previous scrutiny reports have asked for fatality statistics, and there were 2 fatalities on site, and those were not related to workplace activities or the licence conditions. External campsites, this was raised, I think, in one of the questions earlier. So the external campsites are not part of the main Glastonbury Festival site or part of the licence, and we didn't have any noise complaints specifically related to these sites yet. Within this report, it states that there's some additional resources needed to be put in place. And Marek has told me that really relates to things to do with private water supplies, because there's some new regulations coming out in terms of private water supplies, and making sure that those are implemented at those caravan sites or those campsites in NIMP. But as always, these sorts of sites there will need to be checks and balances in place to make sure that they are appropriately licensed and that they are causing a nuisance to local residents. So that will obviously, as always, form part of the mix in terms of monitoring of the festival this year. So going on to the, I suppose, the recommendations of this report for the next year. To ensure continuous improvement, like I said earlier, it's a dynamic festival, so things need to be monitored, and as things change, we need to make sure improvements in place. There are a number of recommendations, those are contained in the appendices of the report. But the priority, the 2 areas that we want, I suppose, highlight this report to focus on is to continue and further develop the measures or restrictions to help address excessive loudness and low frequency noise. So the issues that were, or the mechanisms that were put in place for this year's festival, in terms of the noise modelling, in terms of the extra monitoring by the Glastonbury Festival's consultant, and things to do with having the new variation licence to put in place, different controls for low frequency noise. We want to continue with those, and obviously work with Glastonbury Festival to try and get that or to, like I say, continuously improve the situation, ensure that those measures are working as effectively as possible. And the other recommendation to focus on is to ensure that is to do with ground distribution and develop a communication plan to better inform ticket holders on ground flows in popular areas and a policy on the use of chairs in high capacity crowds. So I think we had some issues this year where there were some of the main stages, people turned up with deck chairs and things like that, which is okay, I suppose, if you're going to watch a small scale event somewhere, but when you're into front of stage with 150,000 people, it causes problems. So things like that are the focus for this year. So that's the end of if there's any questions.
Thank you. Wow, there's a huge amount of work. I mean, you called it an international event. I think I mentioned to suggest it's probably a global event in many ways. And we are, well, mending. In the past, we looked very small council trying to deal with something like this. And the fact that over the years it's passed off with relatively few, and I appreciate that there are local issues here, relatively few problems, I think is a tremendous testament. And let's hope we can keep it going. One thing I didn't pick up on, bearing in mind, of course, that there are various areas of the council involved in handling and managing it. Is there an overall sort of command group that meets to, well, just liaise, really?
Yeah, there's I suppose there's the council has some sort of tactical officer on site, and they feed into, they would be a senior manager that will feed into the, I suppose, the tactical group that Glastonbury Festival have on site, and they will then make decisions, I suppose, on the ground, tactical decisions on behalf of the council. So if there was an incident or there was a breach of licensing conditions, then in liaison with the staff that are on site, that tactical, I suppose, commander would make decisions on what action should be taken. But I might let Marietta, have you got anything you want to add to Marietta?
That actually wasn't what I was getting at. I mean, yes, you will have people on the ground. What I meant is now to bring highways together, environmental health, planners in one room to discuss how they will all work together to fit this thing, to make it work. Because if everybody's working in isolation, that's okay. But it occurs to me that if everybody is talking to each other, then we may end up with a sort of tighter operation. I don't know, but I don't know whether that's been, because with two different councils, it must have been different, but now we're only in one, whether it's through the planning and organisational phase, because I was going to go on to say that if all we're getting back is £32,000, it strikes me off the top of my head that it's costing this council an enormous amount of money for a relatively poor return. And that's not to say that the value to the wider public and the global audience isn't there. But I think it's something in the middle of a financial crisis that we need to address, but we'll come back to that at the moment. I just really want to sort of delve into how we as a council do our bit to make sure this thing works and how coordinated we are in the planning phase.
I can probably come in there. It's Sarah Dowden, Service Director for Regulation and Operational Services. So exactly what you've been describing. Once we became one council, actually, there's areas of the festival that Mendip supported and Somerset County Council supported. So what we started to do last year and we're continuing to do this year is to make sure that highways, environmental health and those planning services are working together with public health, trading standards, and we are one piece internally. So Dave mentioned in his report the multi-agency group that I chair that meets from January to February year during the festival monthly. Following those meetings, what I will do is feedback to Chris Hall and ELT to make sure, just to show them how we are now working together as a council, and actually where we've had in the previous years 3 or 4 sets of different rotors, we're now looking at, we don't need 3 or 4 sets of different rotors, people can multitask during the festival and before the festival to make sure that we're not actually overlapping on resource. So we are trying to this year make it far slicker and to make sure that certainly for the festival, get one response from us to the council in one direction, not 4 or 5 different contacts, which is what's happened in the past because of how we've been set up.
Okay, that's very helpful. I mean, as we had this type of question, clearly there are issues with aspects of this. And so I would expect that any overall sort of command group would be checking on the liaison with the local parishes and the local communities. They wouldn't necessarily be doing it, but I mean, there must be some level of contact. Because whilst obviously quite a lot of people are reasonably okay with it, there are enough people who are concerned about it and the impact on their lives that we need to make sure that we can reduce that as much as possible. I'll leave that for my questions for the moment, unless Dave wants to come back. No. And I'll move on to Simon Coles and then Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a point about this fee of £32,000. I mean, it's clear well, you can touch the sides in terms of the effort and the requirement from officers across the council to deal with this. Unless my maths is awful, but my maths was over 50 years ago now. It's about 16 pence a visitor, and that strikes me as being a totally and utterly inadequate sum for the work that needs to be done by this council to promote a global event, which has a huge impact on the immediate neighbours who are not unreasonably quite concerned about how it is being managed. The fact that it's, I think, managed really, really well is a testament to our staff. I'm wondering how much it is actually costing this authority and how we make some of it, because I suspect that the event itself makes a considerable sum of money. And I don't see why, as a local authority, when we are facilitating all these things and providing all of this, it's not just Somerset Council, there's other people involved, the fire service are involved, the police are involved, the ambulance service are involved. Why those costs should not be A, acknowledged and B, dealt with. So I don't understand why we've got a fee of a mere £32,000, which is a global event, which generates, I suspect, a great deal of money. I have no idea what a great deal of money is, but it's well over £1 million, I should think. Be very surprised if it isn't.
Okay, I don't know. I mean, I think that was a fairly clear statement. A fairly clear statement. I don't know whether the officer wants to respond to it or not. I think.
I was just going to say that that fee is set is a significant fee, so it can't be amended. I mean, Jack can probably give you a bit more information on how that fee is calculated, but in terms of actually us, a fee that they have to legally pay us, that fee cannot be changed. But I'll let Jack explain a little bit more about how the fees are calculated.
Thanks. I mean, I was interested in you referred to it being a combination of rateable value. Of course, if it's farmland, if it's rated as farmland, it's zero rated plus the number of visitors. Well, I think it's a bit of a stretch to say this is simply farmland, because presumably the festival doesn't just exist for 4 or 5 days. It must be there must be activities going on, and there's a fence around that. Does the fence get dismantled every year? I don't know. Sorry, I didn't mean to preempt you.
No, thank you very much. Yes, there's a fence around it, and it does go up each year and it comes down each year. There's quite a thing to see actually that how it actually comes to fruition from a field, as you quite rightly say, to a large festival site and one of the largest festivals in the world.
Yeah.
So in relation to the licensing fees are set by the Licensing Act 2003 and the fee regulation within that act, and it applies to all licensing. It doesn't matter whether it's an event or a large event such as Glastonbury, or whether it's a pub or a restaurant. The fees are set. These fees were set within the 2003 Act. The 2003 Act came into fruition in 2005. The fees have not changed since 2005.
Wow.
We have, and my corporate body, Ministry of Licensing, have been lobbying government as well as local government associations to have the fees raised, because
but no raise since 2005 is, I think it's probably the only fee the Green government hasn't raised. So within the Licence Act itself, it gives you a table really of like rateable values, and it goes A, B, C, D, and E, and it gives you a figure attached to it. So average, a normal pub in the high street or in the rural area would be the band B, which would be probably £180 a year. Because of the rateable value of Festival, that's £350 a year. But then, because of the size of the event, you have a multiplier depending on whether you have 5,000, 5, 10,000, 10, 20, 20, 30, and it goes up. So over 90,000 is £32,000 a year and fee. That's the maximum we can charge for the license. And I do stress it's only for the license fee. In relation to the police, then they have their own negotiations with the festival, as they would do with football ground, when they're using the football ground, and the same applies to the ambulance service and also the fire service. So they don't come as part of their £32,000. £2,000 purely for the licensing authority, and the licensing authority is Somerset County.
Okay, thank you. I get that. I mean, again, having admitted to feeling queasy at the beginning of the meeting, I'm feeling even queasier now. Is there any way we can get a handle on actually how much this does cost us? Because I think, talking about a global event, I mean, such an important event. I mean, we've got to start lobbying politicians on this. I mean, it's a nonsense that we're subsidising an event like this. I mean, for Mendip to do it, for a relatively small council, and we're a relatively small council, and we are in financial straits. So I think that would be very helpful if we could do that. So in terms of a recommendation to the executive, I think that's something that needs to be pushed hard with. Is it DLUC would be responsible for that? Is that the department?
Yes, it would be, but we just had a consultation just been completed in relation to licensing fees for the Licence Act, and we're just waiting for the results of that consultation with the homeowners.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got Dawn next, and then Andy Dingwall online. Oh, sorry, Chris, did you want to add something?
Yeah. So I think there's two parts to it. The licensing fee, as we've heard, is set, and we can't do much about that unless government changes their position. What we are able to do, though, is have a different conversation with Glastonbury Festival as a company. So there is a significant turnover of cash operating that event. They buy in a range of services. So here we kind of stumble upon the difference between something that they are regulated to do and something that they are required to do. So we've heard that they pay the police, they pay the ambulance service or South Ambulance Trust, they pay the fire service to have resources on site to meet their additional requirements. So there's probably a conversation, not probably, there is a conversation that's happening this week between myself, Glastonbury Festivals, and with Duncan Sharkey involved as well. So there is the opportunity to talk to them about the additional cost that and burden placed on this authority. Now, we don't want to discourage them clearly in terms of all of the other socio-economic impacts and positivity that comes from it. But there is currently a cost burden to this council of supporting them in delivering that event. So there is a separate piece around any negotiation as well as potential lobbying on the licence fee.
Thank you very much, Chris. Dawn?
Yeah, before I say anything, obviously caveats, fantastic that we have this festival in Somerset, but the tourism and what it brings to Somerset and the map across the world. However, the model's completely flawed, in my view. You've got services that are getting fully funded for what they provide, and you've got a council which is not being funded for what it provides. And the government model of licensing for these events is completely out of date. If it was based on 2005, they have no capacity then for dealing with these festivals that have sprung up throughout the country, and then being adequately supported by councils who are doing a huge amount of work to enable those festivals. So the model is completely broken in my view, and the licensing fee is completely not representing the work that is required to allow these festivals to take place. I strongly support for your conversations with Glastonbury. They're making millions out of this. And, you know, the fact that we are not asking for more support from them, where police, ambulances are probably getting fully funded for the work they provide, just seems a nonsense. So yeah, I fully support us really pushing on this. You know, they're not going to cancel the event because we push for a bit more money, because it's making them an awful lot of money. I think we just need to start taking the position where we actually expect that our costs are covered. And if a licensing fee isn't going to do that, but yeah, absolutely lobby the government for a license that actually is representative of the kind of events taking place and what they require. So sorry, yeah, feeling quite strongly about what I'm hearing. Just seems a bit ridiculous in my view that this has not been addressed properly by the government, and it seems completely out of touch with, you know, the festivals and the kind of events going on around the country. The feedback I got, yeah, absolutely more water needed on site. I didn't attend myself, but have people I know who attended, and not enough water. And I think, you know, it's a basic thing we should be absolutely covering off every time. The other points I wanted to raise were the parish councils. I didn't hear where the parish councils and the communities have a voice in the impact of this festival on them. I'm hoping that there is a post mop-up conversation happens with parish councils, because communities around the area are going to be hugely impacted, and, you know, like everything else, we need to give them a voice in decisions that are being made and things that are happening to their communities. So I'd like to hear where they are involved and how they are heard. What else did I have? Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks. Good.
I can tell you that Glastonbury Festival take on the responsibility to liaise with the parish councils. They liaise with Hilton Parish Council, and I myself usually attend those meetings just to listen to what's going on and what the feeling from Hilton Parish Council is. Glastonbury Festival also liaise with the adjoining parish councils. I think it's East Pennard and so there are a couple of others around that Glastonbury Festival do liaise with, though we at Somerset Council don't get personally involved with that liaison.
Yeah, please do.
Given that we are the licensing body and we do represent a certain role with our parish councils, the county council, it does feel that we should be somehow driving those conversations a little bit more, or not driving them, but actually involved in those conversations a little bit more, because, you know, the statutory duties we're providing are what are perhaps causing issues for those communities.
Yeah, I mean, that's something, I mean, like Marius says, that officers do attend the parish council meetings, and we'll get that feedback from at the meetings, and then it's produced after the meeting, and that can be taken into consideration in terms of the event planning. But it's something we can, you know, again, we are now at the authority, so these are things that we can look at going forward in terms of, is there an opportunity for more events on certain areas.
Thank you.
Thanks. I don't know who the local members are for that.
There's online.
There's online.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I mean, because clearly the local members have a role in this as well, the liaison with parish councils. Right, next one is Andy Dingwall, and then Wes. Sorry, Wes, I had a complete break to make.
Is it okay
Andy.
to speak, please, Chair? Would it be possible? I did have my hand up, but I'll wait till after Andy.
No, if Claire, if it's relevant to the conversation just going on, please feel free.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll keep it brief. It's so interesting that you just mentioned the ward member. My question was, are the ward members an afterthought? I think that it would benefit if we because we're working in with the communities, the parishes. It's not just Pilton Parish Council. So can I ask, are we considered as a local ward members afterthoughts, because we can be of more use with feeding, you know, information to the local communities and feeding back and being an information flow.
Yes, there, I mean, I would agree. I mean, my personal view is that as councillors, we probably don't get used enough by officers, and I think that's something I would encourage. Not that I want to increase my workload, but it's one of the reasons we're here, is to help bridge the gap with parishes and local communities. So, Dave, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, if there is a vehicle through ward members to liaise with the community on certain matters, then that's again something that could be looked at. I think Jack wants to come in as well on the licensing.
Okay, Jack?
Yes, it's just on that actually. I know that the villages around that area are all sort of liaised with by Glastonbury Festival. And there is a residents and parish meetings which take place at Marietta itself, in Pilton itself. In relation to ward members will be notified of any minor, any variations or changes to the licence that's there. But I'm sure that Glastonbury Festival won't go down a list of ward members for them. That will be included onto the parish council meetings.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking on behalf of them, but certainly if it was in my ward, I really want to be deeply involved in this because I think
just sort of thinking ahead, it may be sort of going forward that perhaps Glastonbury Festival might host a ward members meeting for that particular area.
Can I just quickly come back, please, Chair? Sorry, the Glastonbury Festival and the community side and the parish council side, there is good communication. I just feel we could improve it more with the council, with officers involved in this, and I can understand why, because you know the officers and the teams have been working with Glastonbury Festival for a very, very long time. So this is more of a comment to encourage it, to sort of keep us informed. I don't feel like it has been enough, but I think it can improve and change in the future.
thank you for that.
Yeah, I think we just need to be really clear and drawing a distinction between the role of the council in monitoring a regulated process and licence. That the role of the council is for monitoring. Of course, we care about the impact that has on the communities, but we are not the events holder. We are not the licence holder. It is their responsibility, and amongst a range of others, to engage with the wider community. So if we can support that and we can push that forward, then of course we should do so. We do have to draw a line between where we're engaging the community to hear their concerns as to how we react to the monitoring of the licence versus the responsibilities of Glastonbury Festival, the company, in how they impact on communities outside of the licensing conditions. So I think we're more than happy to engage. I think the ownership of most of this does sit with the event holder though.
Yeah, I think possibly what we're struggling with is a legacy situation where a set of council officers or a council has been dealing with this for many, many years, reasonably successfully as far as we can see. And what we're trying to bring to it is a fresh face. I've never been to Glastonbury. I don't know how many other members have been. I've had to drive through there in the middle of June, which is quite weird. You don't drive through there in the middle of June, you go somewhere else. So I think from a scrutiny point of view, I think what we want to do is, and I do completely understand that the distinction between us as a regulatory authority, but also we have a responsibility as a council and local members to local concerns. And it's actually meeting those responsibilities adequately without overstepping the line in either direction, which is, I think, where officers' advice comes in. But we have heard in public questions that there are outstanding issues with the festival in certain areas. And of course, the whole thing is reviewed every year. Recommendations are changed, and as Dave said, the whole thing, progressive improvement as things are brought to light and changes are required, which is really good. But I think your warning is timely. I just want to make sure that I fully understand, well, I and my fellow committee members fully understand where that line is, because it just appears a little bit fuzzy to me at the moment. But thank you, Chris. I've got Andy Dingwall online. Andy?
Thank you very much, Chair. Two questions. The first is around the funding side. I was curious, we're talking specifically here about the licensing, of course, and the fees associated with that. But as Glastonbury Festival Events Limited, are they also subject to business rates and other taxes that do flow into the council in other ways outside of just the license fee? The second question I had was, you may have, I think I heard this touched on slightly, but I've had a bit of a dodgy internet, so I'm afraid I might ask again. Our public questioner earlier today talked about other events that spring up around the main event. And he mentioned specifically that some of these even come with their own entertainment and bars. They're not just campsites. So I was wondering whether these are licensed separately, and also potential revenue there, whether they're licensed permanently, as in they are a campsite with a permanent bar, or whether it's just specific to Glastonbury, and whether that's enforced throughout the festival.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I mean, I picked up that maybe some of these ancillary sites are possibly the source of the problem. And whilst you can regulate the main festival itself, if there's a whole load of satellites, and I don't know how many there are, I guess they've all gone through the licensing process. Chris, can you just fill us in a little bit on the background?
Yeah, in terms of the ancillary events, then those will be subject to licensing, probably temporary event notices. I will let Jack probably be able to give you a bit more information on how that process works.
Thank you very much. Yes, the outside camping areas, then they will be applying for, not applying, but they will give us notice for the temporary event that's taking place, and that costs them £21. That's another statute thing.
Oh, £21.
God. So how long is a temporary event notice? What's the maximum you can have hold up? And what's the maximum duration of a temporary event notice?
It's under 72 hours in one hit. So they would have one temporary event notice for the Glastonbury festival duration.
Yeah, that's 5 days.
So it's £21 for the event.
Bargain. Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
It's worth adding that those are statutory fees again.
Oh yeah.
Just going on from that, the temporary event notice is a light touch approach for licensing. That's it wasn't really for these type of events. It is for like someone having a party on their building in their back garden, that type of thing.
Light touch, heavy impact. Yes. Thank you very much. Wes.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification from one of the officers with reference to page 29 in the 63-year steps accessible reduction. I take that means that the periphery, for example, could be maybe a maximum 6 decibels below that figure as worst case scenario, maybe, because obviously this is where we've got all the possible housing really on the edge of the campsites from the periphery. So how does this? Can you just explain that really, what the maximum would be?
So what we've got is before main stage curfew, we've got customer members on the license. Now they are, the festival organisers are not to exceed those decibel levels on the license. What happens afterwards is there's, after that curfew period, which is midnight 30, the festival over a shoulder period of midnight to midnight 30 make those reductions of 6 dB stepped over that shoulder period. So that's only in the low frequency. So that being 63 hertz and below. So that doesn't necessarily reduce the overall volume of individual sound systems. It reduces the low frequency energy leaving the site. So you couldn't necessarily put a single figure on what is a noise level at a temporary event notice site or even at a residential property within Filton. Chair. Yes, what they're trying to do is reduce the impact of low frequency at night.
Yeah, so I remember licensing from the point of view when we were at SSDC, in licensing obviously a lot of smaller festivals. The acoustic model is actually quite accurate in the peripheries all the time because we have neighbouring properties.
Yes, and the model usually is quite accurate within the immediate vicinity of the festival. The problem is to model the environmental factors as the energy travels further, the impacts change significantly, and depending on the treatment by wind, temperature inversions. So it is nearly impossible to give you a single figure of what noise level it will be with reductions in the 63 Hz.
Thank you, Joe.
Andy Dingle has just come back saying he wants clarification on the business rates. Now, I think you said that the rateable value of the farmland that the festival is on was £350 a year. Is that right? Yeah, the business rates are, well, non-existent, I would think, more or less.
But that is the band for the trade value, yes.
Yeah, so then yes, so there are no other income streams associated with this council other than the licensing fees and anything else we can negotiate in terms of services rent.
Just going on to the bands, I'm just bring this up. So the rateable value of that particular the property there would be between the ranges of £87,000 and £125,000 a year. And so that gives us a band then within the Act, and then that band relates to a figure of £350 at the end.
Oh, right, so the 350 is operational value, it's actually the value of the rent.
For the license now. Rateable value is different.
I suspect that it's that that their rates are paid based on their, what is, I assume as a farm the rest of the year, so I assume they pay as a farm, there's another tax that they.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Andy, does that answer your question?
I think so, Chair. Yes, yeah. Thank you
very much. I've got Frederica Smith-Roberts, who's the portfolio holder.
Morning, everyone. I just wanted to come in here and just say, actually, I know obviously we're all here to scrutinise this year's festival, but I really wanted it to be put on record about just how good a job the team have done this year at a time when we were bringing the councils together and to do the work that was going on at the same time as vesting day and then leading into the festival. And I think there's something around all of us as members, around our expectations, around whatever licensing event takes place in our localities, around the difference between our role as the authority and that of the organisers, especially in the place of Glastonbury Festival. As I saw some good work by especially Sarah Dowden and her team at looking to keep the local members up to date, having specific meetings. We all know that communication can be better in whatever work we do as a council, but I did see that there in a website coming in where the community can feed back, and Sarah looked to keep myself and councillors up to date, and obviously we can learn from that as the festival moves forward into this year.
Yeah, I think it's very clear that the effort and progressions put in by the officers is first rate. An event like this to run reasonably smoothly, and clearly the operating company is pretty good as well. Otherwise, there would be severe difficulties with regaining the license. But nevertheless, it's a big event in a small area for a week or so, 10 days. So it needs looking at. Certainly, I think that what's come out of this is a severe concern that whether we are recovering our costs adequately or covering our costs adequately. Dawn, do you have one last question before we move on?
Yeah, sorry, it was just when it comes to the noise, if they are in breach of the noise, what's the process from then on? What are the fines that get implemented if they are found to be in breach? And how does that process pan out for sort of better management at the next event? I did also have one other question. I noticed under your licensing, so safety of people. So if there were assaults or incidents happening on site, do we get reports of that, or is that all dealt with by the police? Because if we've got some responsibilities there, I would quite like to see some information on what incidents take place or what assaults take place during the festival. Thank you.
I think the assault side of things we dealt with by police. Yeah, they bring them to, when the festival's running, there is there are, I think, two debrief meetings a day, at least, and things like that are brought by the police. If the police are notified of assault or there's an arrest on site, then those figures are taken to that meeting and fed back to and there are representatives of the council at that meeting. So, you know, we effectively get real time, say real time, but within the, every half day of the festival, at least, we're getting real time feedback on things like assaults, medical incidents, etc. I don't know, Jack, you want to answer the question on licence breaches?
Yes, thanks very much. If there are problems with the licence and it is warranted, then a review could be called in relation to the licence. Then that would go to a licensing subcommittee to be determined. And then the licence subcommittee will make a decision. And their decisions could be do nothing, revoke the licence, remove the DPS, which is not being managed properly. This applies to all licences, not just the festival. And also to add conditions to the licence in order to sort of try and put it into time. So that is a review process under the licence now. If it's a breach, a continued breach, then we'll be looking at prosecution. And we would do that in relation to noise issues as well. And there's primary legislation in relation to noise that may be used if it's warranted.
Just to ask, have we ever pursued anything on that basis, or is it something that has always been managed through conversations?
No, I did pursue a prosecution against Glastonbury Festival due to an overrun by Paul McCartney, which occurred 2 festivals ago. And we went through to the court process, but then we decided to send that out of court. And the Glastonbury Festival received a caution, which they accepted, and that was still on their record. Yes.
I just probably add on what Jack said there, this year, following the approval of the prosecution that was pursued, obviously, you may have noticed Lana Del Rey potentially could have overrun the festival this year and actually
shut down.
Yeah, Glastonbury Festival took exactly the action that was needed in terms to control that noise. So, that is where us being on site, working through these solutions with the festival pays off.
Hazel?
Thank you, can you hear? Yeah. I suppose we would be regarded as being party poopers for prosecuting, but interestingly, it would be interesting to know how much did they settle for? Are we not allowed to know? And where does that money go? Does that come to this? Did that come to some county council, or what happens in those cases?
Okay, in regard to the settlement, what was settlement is disposal, so that how it's dealt with. So if it goes forward to court, to be fined or to sort of see, whether or not to have a trial.
No money.
But we settled by issue of caution, which they accepted. The caution is like the first stage going forward now. That's part of our enforcement policy. And so if it happens again or something else is occurs such as that, then we will go forward with prosecution.
And can I ask some questions? Presumably we won't be in that situation because they've, cut it dead now at the time. But if it did go to court and there was a fine, who gets the money?
I don't say that's unfortunately not.
No.
They go to the government house.
Thank you, Hazel. Let's not be too trigger happy on this.
Just genuine question, that's what you want, isn't it?
Yeah, I think one final question for me, and then I'll sum up, because I think you've sort of covered this in some detail now. The final thing, I think you said that, because I'm actually quite interested in the ancillary sites, these temporary event notices. Have you ever received many complaints about those sufficient to warrant the refusal of a licence?
No, we haven't. The process is that anyone can apply for a temp person. Okay, it's not like it's the wrong terminology. Anyone can give us notice of a temp event notice, and that is exactly what it means. An individual will give us notice that an event is taking place. The licensing authority, i.e. the licensing side, Somerset County Council, cannot object to a temporary event notice. Environmental protection can, by the council. Public safety can, by the council, and the police. They are the only people who can object to a temporary event notice. So once the temporary event takes place, if there are instances of noise or unruly behaviour that's under 1%, what I do, I urge people to make a complaint, because we can't do anything unless we know that something has gone wrong. And then when the next time that an event is applied for, then we have justification then to object to either environmental protection or public safety.
So, I mean, but there I ask this, there is coordination that when a license application comes in, that it does get consulted to the bodies who may have an interest in making an objection or not. Yes, that's not intent.
Yes, it comes in, it's an automated process now, where you can file online or where you can give notice online. And then that comes into a case state to deal with, and then they will flag it up and pass it on to environment protection and public safety, and it automatically goes to the police department.
Okay, thank you very much. Suzanne.
I'm a member of Glastonbury and I've lived there for 20 years. And I know the gentleman who was speaking earlier from Hilton, and I don't know whether he would agree with me, but what I see is that most people, you're not going to get a massive amount of complaints, because most people know, it's almost like a fact of life, the festival's going to happen. So generally, people who live locally make one or two choices. They either get on board and join in and have the fun, or they actually go away. Because if it's not for you, life becomes actually quite difficult, everyday life. And so you just go away for a few days, because people, so I don't think you'll get the number of complaints that you think you might get. People either accept it's just how it is, there's nothing they can do to change it. But I think the impact on locals who don't want to be part of it is very, very significant. Just even getting to work, getting to the shops becomes difficult.
Well, as I said earlier, I used to commute through that 361 on a regular basis, and I would always go up on the M5 or the A303 when the festival's on, because it was, and I think it is a valid point. People go away for the week or the 10 days, then that is an impact, and that's just one of those things. So, okay. Right, we've given this a good working over. Thank you very much for the presentations, the questions we've received and the answers we've received. I think the key points that seem to have come out in the discussion are the costs to this council and how much we can recover or get an income. And I think that's something that we as a committee would like to keep an eye on. And Chris, it would be very useful to get some feedback from your discussions insofar as you can give them with the festival company later this week. We've talked about local liaison. I have to say I think the overall, I think what we're dealing with is a sort of legacy situation that's moving into a new council, and so it's going to have to bed down a little bit. There are comments made about the impacts on the local population, local communities, and since the commitment of the officers is for continuous improvement and dealing with issues the following year, then I think we probably need to come back here 12 months from now and review what happened in the previous 12 months, which will be the first full year of operation for this council. I think that's quite important, because there will have been a change. Some of the personnel will still be there, but there will have been a change. And of course, this council will be going through a rather drastic dietary regime. And I think we need to be aware of that and the potential implications for large events and global events like this. And the third point, I think, is has been covered, is the coordination between the different arms of the council that have responsibilities in this area to make sure they talk to each other, that there is an overall, almost a gold command that keeps an eye on this from the planning stage, because these things do move. And I know, if you've been running an event for many, many years, you just almost you can get a bit blasé and say, well, they almost run themselves because you just do the same things at the same time. Nevertheless, there is always grit in the system. And so I think a good overall command looking at this and keeping an eye on how the different components are coming together, working together and liaising, particularly with the local community, is very important. Those for me, I think, are the main takeaways of the discussion. I don't know whether any members have any other points that I may have missed, Dawn.
I would like to know what the outcome of the licensing petitions have been, to see whether anything has been heard. So I don't know if we can ask for some feedback when the government's consultation period ends. And also, I'd quite like to know what our case has been for this particular event in terms of what we have put to the government and what we require of licensing for these sorts of events. So I don't know if there's some information can be provided on what case we put to the government. Thank you.
Okay.
Just to answer that, there's no particular case been put forward with the Glastonbury Festival. It's on the licence act, as the consultation is on the licence act fees in general. So it's down to all the fees that licence act dictates. And so licence authority has been asked to sort of formulate what the cost is and what the true cost is in processing the applications that come in.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the general across the board. I'm bearing in mind the fees have increased since 2005. Well, because I was always under the impression, I've never sat on licensing, so I'm quite naive about this, that actually licensing was predicated on cost recovery. But we couldn't charge more than our costs were. But from what you're saying, is there is actually a cap on what we can charge anyway.
Yeah, that's true of discretionary fees, such as taxes, but not statutory fees.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I think we could miss a good working over. We're now going to segue into the next item on the agenda.
Can you have a little break?
Oh, yes, would everybody like a little break for 5 minutes? Yeah. Next item. This is Chris Brown, Service Director. Can you hear me? Service Director.
Very bubbly.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely. I've never been called bubbly before.
So you've got a chest infection.
Yes, well, I'll try and enunciate it as best.
I think it's the
Yes, it's not me, it's him, yeah. Right, Ross Sleeping Initiative, Chris.
Indeed.
Please give us an update on where we are with this.
Yes, thank you, Chair, for inviting us along today. The committee wanted us to talk about Ross Sleep, and we thought we'd place it in context. So we're going to give you some a reminder really of the last time we attended Scrutiny, where we were talking about demand and supply, talk about the wider housing options service, talk about Ross Sleeping initiatives, and then the strategy which has been developed as well. So I've got some colleagues here. I've got Stacey Tizard from our Ross Sleeping team. I've got Jan Harrington, who's both doing strategy but also well versed in housing options. And I've got Alice Knight, who is housing options and has a focus on finance for the team at the moment. So we've got some slides.
Can you share?
Oh, am I sharing? Oh dear. What's gone wrong? Yeah, but what can look on screen, I think that is on the slides. There on this. Just going to delay. now.
We do all have it on our packs, don't we?
We just do it on the packs, on the.
Yeah.
Can do, I will catch up. I'll do the introduction and I'll catch up with the slides for everyone else. That's okay. So. Apologies. Right, I'll start fresh. So Chris Brown, Housing Service, got some colleagues here. I've introduced them already. So what we wanted to do was place this in context of the demand and supply pressures, roughly in the context of that. So we have 11,000 households which are on the Home Finder choice-based lettings register. That's a significant high level of demand. We have about 3,000 approaches each year to the housing options service. So that's 3,000 households who feel that their housing circumstances put them at risk of homelessness or they could be homeless. We have 57 rough sleepers at the last count. And we have problems with demand. So the annual challenge, or the challenge is to make sure that we have enough accommodation. We have about 243 people in temporary accommodation at the moment who are, we have a duty to house. We have to use temporary accommodation. Some of that is our own accommodation as a council. Some of it is provided through the private rented sector, although that is very difficult at the moment to secure because of the challenges in the private rented sector market and the challenges of getting that at a rate that we are able to afford, the customer is able to afford. And some will be housed in bed and breakfast. So that 243 people in temporary accommodation is a significant figure. There is a slide you have to say how much that's increased over the last few years as well. We do lose council properties through the right to buy each year. So in two locations, the east and the north of the county, we have local authority stock, but that is reducing through the right to buy, albeit we are building as well. We do obviously use social, other social landlords as well to help us with our discharge of duty. We have challenges with building new homes at the rate that we would like to build them. And the next scrutiny meeting will look at growth and what we're doing about that. And there's a shortage of homes of the right size and type that we need. Our customers have many different characteristics, many different needs, and we don't necessarily have the easy availability of some of that stock. So we've got a couple of slides there, one which is, no, I'll go on to after I finished, so I've gone to finished, sorry. So I've got a slide there which is just sharing that we have the best part of 11,000 people on the housing register. And we've also got a slide which is showing that the different sizes of houses, there is a disparity between the availability of stock and the demand for that stock. So it exaggerates the situation for many people of their access to housing. What I'll do now, I will just pass over to Stacey, who'll talk a little about how we're doing approach.
Hello. So first of all, I'm just going to go through the timeline. So 2017 was the crisis peak. So there's 4,677 individuals who are sleeping across England on a typical night. This has increased 165% since 2010. In 2018, central government released a rough sleeping strategy, aiming to halve rough sleeping by 2024 and eradicate it by 2027. 2018 initial funding made available, 120 million local authorities were given across England to encourage to deliver targeted interventions in that area. In 2019, there was a decrease in numbers sleeping rough, down from 43% to 2,665 individuals rough sleeping across England on a typical night. 2020, COVID-19 pandemic, and over 37,000 people had access to accommodation, and there was an additional 380 million funding. 2020, rough sweeping strategy was updated, and it was setting a clear aim of ending rough sweeping for good, with 2 billion funding committed over the next 3 years. And 2025, the idea the government set that rough sweeping would have ended. So RSI's, that's the rough sweeping initiative, is based on 4 main pillars. So there's prevention, intervention, recovery, and transparent and joint approach. So firstly, prevention. So we will not end rough sweeping if we do not get better at preventing it from happening in the first place. Whilst individuals and personal circumstances are complex and often out of our control, we are still determined to deliver a prevention-first approach that reduces the risk of someone sleeping rough. The better sharing of information between services and early support are key. Intervention. We know that the longer a person stays on the street, the more difficult it becomes to rebuild a life away from it. Where it has not been where it has not been possible to prevent someone sleeping rough, we need a quick and targeted help to get them back on track. Anyone sleeping rough in Somerset will have an appropriate offer of support tailored to their needs. Although funding is vital, this must sit alongside strengthened partnerships between local agencies and voluntary sector to address people's needs. Recovery. We know that an initial intervention to help someone off the street won't always be enough. Everyone's journey is unique. People need stable, safe, and supportive accommodation that they call home, physical and mental health treatment where needed, and a viable route into employment to sustain a life off the streets for good. Transparent and joint approach. The pandemic showed us what could be achieved if we have a joint approach is taken. This underpins everything. We cannot end rough sweeping alone. We must promote transparency through both our partners and our customers and ensure that we are always working together. After all, rough sleeping and homelessness is not just a housing issue. So the impact of rough sleeping, as we know, rough sleeping is the most extreme form of homelessness, and that strongly is linked to systematic failure than leaving prison. As an individual who spends just 3 nights on the streets is 15 times more likely to experience mental health conditions. Those who experience rough sleeping are more vulnerable to crime, substance misuse, and illness. 89% are victim, 54% more likely to use drugs and alcohol, and 79% more likely to attend A&E with a serious illness. People who sleep rough regularly over a long period of time are more likely to die at a young age than the general population. The average age of death for an individual rough sleeping in England is 43 years old, 78 for the general population. They are also more likely to die from injury, poisoning, and suicide, 8 times greater risk in men and 19 times in women. Wider community, there's a lack of dedicated services that leads to entrenched behaviours such as begging and other forms of antisocial behaviour, which directly impacts the wider community. So the rough sleeping initiative in Somerset. So we were given 1.8 million for 23 to 24 and 1.5 million for 24-25. Somerset successfully bid for 3 million of funding from DULUC to deliver its RSI. Partnership working an approach, no more working in silos, so we're not isolated. Highly skilled and passionate teams, members of staff to build and deliver our rough sleeping services. Many have extensive experience and some even have lived experience of homelessness and rough sleeping. We find key is personally centred support and trauma-informed approach. Our teams deliver personalised and coordinated support with their customers, empowering rather than enabling and working in such a way that does not re-traumatise the individual. Targeted intervention, no one-size-fits-all mentality. Each locality plays to their strength. In Somerset Council, we have Housing First scheme, and it has delivered 15 units in the past 2 years, 8 in South and 7 in West, with another 4 planned within the next year. Fast-track access to counselling, learning new life skills, promoting meaningful use of time, access to primary healthcare, and working towards independence. Dedicated bed space available across Somerset, suitable to our cohort needs, with the aim to increase this with 1.4 million RSAP funding. Solution focused and customer led. navigating the challenges such as access and affordability of housing, particularly in the private rental sector, health inequalities, education, and changing perspective of rough sleeping, peer support so those with lived experience can get back to their communities. And SWEP. SWEP stands for Severe Weather Emergency Protocol. So the purpose of SWEP is not a legal requirement, but it's a discretionary power to prevent further harm and death during periods of severe weather. We're currently finalising the shared procedure for Somerset Council. So RSI leads are agreeing a procedure due to vast differences in weather and conditions across the county. Each area will retain decisions to trigger SWEP in locality area. Common sense approach. We're not going to wait for 3 nights in a row of freezing temperatures to trigger. We will consider the feel like temperature, and that's for extreme cold, heat, winds, flooding, etc. Increased opportunity for engagement. So SWEP has proven to be effective in engaging even the most entrenched individuals and offer a stepping stone away from the street. Difference between life and death. During severe weather, mortality rates increase dramatically and crucial services such as the NHS can become overwhelmed. And currently finalising our process, which will expand on what happens when we activate SWEP, how we communicate this, how it is accessed, and also a communications plan is being finalised. Thank you.
Nothing? Okay, talk a little bit about
You get a bit closer to the mic.
and let's talk a little bit about the homelessness and roof seeking strategy, which is the vehicle that pulls together all the systems for homelessness, all of the different agencies and that are involved with the client groups who are affected by homelessness, and is a legislative requirement. How Homelessness Act and the Homeless Reduction Act both require that we have a current strategy in place in order to make homelessness decisions in housing options. So we cannot do that without a current strategy, which we have got. We've got a Somerset wide, the districts always combined to pull one together. And this work that we're doing now is a project to update and replace that at the end of 5 years, which is the cycle that the homeless strategy normally fulfills. I'm a bit nervous because you're not going to be able to see the slides and some of them are visual. On to my slides. So there's a slide before that, but oh, you've got. Okay, thank you. Great. Very helpful. So we have pulled together a project team. The sponsor is Chris and Federica. And the project team, the health and modelling and heavily involved. And within that project team, we have people who are from all different parts of housing options and different relevant elements from adult social care, children's social care, and public health. And individuals are heading up different sub-work streams within it. A homeless strategy is a very large piece of work. It's a whole systems approach. And the first part of it involves a needs assessment of basically what kind of services we've got, what are the needs that we're projecting in terms of homelessness, and what is the gap analysis, what do we need, what do we need to do differently, what services are missing. That's a really big piece of work to look at demographics, the homelessness and the sleeping stats, the home finder statistics to tell us who's looking for housing, what the affordable housing delivery programme is, what the rental market's like, what accommodation we've got, what's working, what isn't. So I won't talk more about it because there's a lot, but so it's a big piece of work, and it's going to take us literally until March 25. That's our aim. The work that's overseeing the governance is through the Homeless Reduction Board, which is a large partnership of people from the council, people from health, colleagues from different provider organisations, different registered providers, housing associations. So it's got a really robust governance around it. It leads to other strategies and work programmes such as ME, which is making every adult so for people with multiple complex needs, Better Futures programme, which is a council-run led programme to try to find better systems for people with more complex needs, and some of the internal projects that we're running around accommodation. So there's lots of things. It also links to the housing strategy, and at one point we did consider whether to join the two up, but we've decided because of capacity problems and just the enormity of the homelessness strategy that we're going to keep them separate. There are two development phases. First is gathering all the data, which it is very data-driven, intelligence-driven, but also involves all of our partner agencies, their views, and the views of people with lived experience. We need to spread that throughout. And then the second phase is the strategy and action plan, where we pull all of that together and summarise it and work with everyone to formulate our new strategy and what we're going to do to make a difference, to make things change. That process is very collaborative. Part of the law actually is very prescriptive around what you have to cover in order to deliver a homelessness strategy. Part of that prescriptiveness is it has to be co-produced. It has to be a collaborative effort with all of the key agencies that are involved in systems of voluntary sector, probation, adult social care, children's social care, health, housing options, all of us. So it's pulling together. It's quite powerful. It's a really positive thing to do. The work that we've done is put into compliance in phase one, which we're well ahead of the usual kind of thing that you would expect, a project initiation, and we're developing the project timeline. It's being defined as at the moment. Equalities and resources and health are a golden thread that runs through every work we've done and every work stream, and we need to make sure that they're really high profile throughout to get that done. All the data needs to include protected characteristics, so it's quite disaggregated, it's quite a volume of work. And then the review needs to look at and identify issues around our current levels of homelessness and what we project going forward, looking at the economics, the demographics, the energy, population, just the whole picture, all the things that could influence. It needs to focus on prevention activity and support activity. Accommodation is an absolute key to this. And a review of the existing strategy, which is nearly complete, but not complete in January, which is looking at, did the current strategy work? Has it made a difference? Where is it strong? Where is it weak? What's missing? Where are the pressures? What are the gaps? How did the action plan actually do what we set out to do? And pretty much that's it in a nutshell. It's a big piece of work. It's something that we want to now ask Scrutiny, really, how do you want to be involved in this going forward? Because it's going to run until March 25. What would you like from the officers and South and Mark? How would you like us to engage with you? And how often do you want us to bring updates? And I feel that sometimes updates might not be worth it because we've got a project to share with you. But there are different steps within this process where we will have, again, to phase two, we will be producing a summary of the analysis of all the data. So what is our data telling us? What do we think that means? What are our stakeholders telling us? And we will have a Bible of all of the data for internal reference and a summary document that tells us what we think the data is telling us. So that could be a milestone. That would be if we run to time at the very beginning of June. But we're happy to come and talk to you throughout. If you want us to work through with you as development, then we're very happy to do that. We're just conscious that you will have a very big workload and you might want to have stages where you'd like to hear from us and be able to talk about and input into how those documents develop.
Thank you, John.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. Very interesting. Yeah, in response to that, can you put your mic on? Yes, sir. In response to the latter point, well, I suppose the committee is always going to be interested in the initial question whenever you start any piece of work. What is it you're trying to do? So, I mean, that's clearly, you have to understand what you're trying to do before you embark on anything. I think you've given us that information now. Where I'm struggling in terms of milestones and updates is actually where is an appropriate point, because what you've just described, I think, is to an extent an iterative process. You've actually got to, I think, you understand what you want to do. You also understand there's a huge amount of information to be gathered. What I haven't got a sense is of where the previous legacy councils were and whether they were in sort of close harmony in their work on rough sleeping, or whether there has been some catching up required to sort of harmonise across the piece. So I've got just a couple other points. And so I was going to say that in a way, I think it's, I don't know, I appreciate it and know what other committee members think. In a way, I think it's up to Chris and his colleagues to come back to us when they've got something that you think is worthy of reporting. Because I'm not, I mean, we're certainly not down in the details of this. You know how it's supposed to be and how it's evolving. I think if we hadn't heard from you by about a year's time, you might say what's going on. But normally, Chris is pretty good at keeping us in the loop of various strands of work. So I think that's my initial point, is we know where you're starting from. And we would be happy to hear from you when you think you've got to a point that is worth reporting, and whether it's after phase one, whether you've got all the information in. But I am quite interested to know how level is the playing field you're starting from in respect of the old district council arrangements, and then I'll come on to councillors.
Yeah, so just on the point about the service as it is, so the service was delivered in two different ways from the in the districts. So two of the districts delivered through contracts, so had a contract to deliver, two delivered through direct delivery. So quite a varied approach. Going forward, the government's encouraging us to deliver in a consistent way. We would want to do that as well. So that's where we're at the moment, and it will be a short period of time, still a period of time until we get that harmonisation. We have contracts running, but the communication is there. So Stacey, talk give a bit more explanation, but certainly with things like the SWEP, all the officers are working together to make sure a standard policy. Likewise with other parts of the service, just trying to make it consistent. We are moving towards some sort of structural change at some point, and we sort of need that to allow people to work in a more consistent way. So at the moment, it has inherited different ways of working, but people are communicating well, and we are moving towards a more unified service within a more unified housing options service. So that's where we're at. I think as far as key milestones, I think John will certainly do. There'll be members who will be invited to working groups, looking at the data and the information. It might be around about 6, 7, 8 months or something where it'd be worthwhile coming back and giving you
the findings and some initial thoughts, but I think members will want to be involved, or some members, in some of the working groups.
Okay, thank you. Given that the two approaches, one is in-house and the other is by contract, then I'm anticipating that there is a disparity of skills in relation to some will be far more hands-on, and others will be just familiar with managing contracts. Is that a fair assessment or?
I think there's a real mixture because it's not quite as black and white as that. So the internal colleagues, Stacey, other colleagues, Carol, have got a great deal of knowledge and expertise because we've been working in this field for a long time. In addition to that, some of the teams, the East and the West, have got a lot of directly employed staff delivering outreach services, delivering tenancy support, prevention work, housing cultures, specialist housing options officers. And some of the other two areas have got some of that. We also do have some contracts where we're funding delivery partners to deliver things like housing first or off-street accommodation offers. And in the south, there's probably predominantly more of that and north, but it's a mixed bag. And what we're doing as a team is working together as a virtual and in person, but a virtual team because we're not structured as a team. And this is just in relation to rough sleeping, not the wider homelessness, because there are other pieces of work going on around that. So I think there is the inherent skill. What we have to decide going forward is how much we outsource and how much we that's better, and how much we bring in house.
Yeah.
And I think that DEVA are looking for a more homogenous service offer. Now that won't be exactly the same in every area because some areas have needs that other areas don't. So for example, South and North have a real need for additional support around prison leavers. This is less of a thing in East and West. So there will be some differences, and some of the accommodation is, if you're talking about high support accommodation for rough sleepers, not ordinary support accommodation, you're talking about who owns the property, who has the lease, who has the expertise. So I do think that will always be provided by the different providers. You can have there isn't one provider who works across the county in terms of the accommodation. But in terms of the service offers, we're looking to roll out the things that work really well. So, for example, Housing First in East is rolled out into South. Counselling in South is now rolled out into East. And we're trying to look at things going forward in that way. So when the opportunity came up to bid for, we've got 269,000 recently of additional money from DEVA. We looked at that as a whole county. So the things that we bid for were an extra nursing capacity for the homeless health care team, so that they've got capacity to give more mental health support, which will benefit, however they employ it, will benefit the whole of the county, and additional help to support workers to work transitionally where there are crises to prevent tenancy failure in rough sleeping accommodation schemes where many of our very complex needs people struggle even with the support that is there because they're so complex, and with people to help them to get into a position where they are able to access accommodation that currently they present to high risk for. So, and then another part of that is to support people in accommodation to be able to start employment, and that's a rent relief schemes, that's a big part of that. So all of that we've done as a team going forward. There was no argument whatsoever. We just completely agreed it was fine. But that's what we want to achieve more often. And in January we have we've got to update our ending of sleeping plan, which is the plan that we've got for what we perceive as our gaps, our challenges, our successes, and what we need to do. What are the actions? What do we need more of? Accommodation is always big on that. And we'll do that, and that will then inform going forward what we can successfully bid for. We've got a new bid round. We've got, well, do look to us in summer, there's usually slippage that we'll see. We've got so our current RSI funding ends March 25, and then we've got this next year for all of it again. Because as we've come together as a one council, our numbers are quite high combined in terms of rough sleeping, and the rough sleeping picture is getting worse, not better, due to economic failures, to system failures. It's a national picture, it's not just Somerset, we're very much in line, but our numbers are high, we stand out as a council. And that attracts more funding, so it may be that we are able to bid for more resource, and to make sure that each area has got a really good offer, and to rethink some of the way that we do things as well.
Okay, thank you. Chris, I think in your presentation, you made reference to discretionary and statutory responsibilities. Now, bearing in mind that the council seems to be moving in a direction of concentrating on its statutory responsibilities, do you, how is that going to impact on this? I'm assuming, I don't know for certain, that the rough sleeping thing is all statutory, but is there anything wrapped in around that that is discretionary? And is that likely to be affected, bearing in mind that it's covered by the housing revenue account rather than the general fund?
So I think the key challenge for the service, although we have duties which are statutory, and that's very expensive when we have to place people in accommodation, and then they're sometimes in temporary accommodation for a long period of time. The investment needs to be at the front end, it needs to be in that prevention. As a percentage, we don't do as well as some of the local authorities on preventing homelessness. This is, if we can do more of that, that's very cost effective. So when we're looking at the service and how to reshape it with financial challenges around, we can't just focus on our duty element, because that will lead to more expense over time. We must do more on the prevention side. So the service and its shape that's being proposed and is being developed will put more into the triage process, more into the prevention work. And over time, we hope to increase from quite low base, preventing about 29% of homelessness, which is relatively poor, nearer to the national average, which is around about 52%. So that's where we need to put energies. Yeah, we need to put energies. But to do that, it means that it's not quite as simple as saying statutory, do statutory things, don't do the non-statutory, because we don't have to necessarily prevent, but actually we do, in order to solve it.
Yes,
Then your numbers will skyrocket, and then that will cost a lot more. So prevention is cheaper, and where we just need to get really consistent with the prevention work and creative, be very creative around how you can make that work. Just in terms of rough sleeping, there is nothing about rough sleeping unless somebody has a priority need that's statutory. It is not statutory duty, but it is a ring-fenced grant. You cannot spend money on anything else. It is specifically for rough sleeping intervention. So in a sense, the grant that we get can only be used for that very purpose. And in fact, we have to give it back to do what we don't spend it.
Thank you. Livestock. Andy Tinkle, please.
Thank you, Chair. My hand was raised a little earlier, but the questions were answered throughout the presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Hazel.
Thank you. 2 or 3 things really. In the Taunton area, Taunton, so that's why I ask. I know that we have a good deal of provision, and I know that there are some people who are rough sleeping because they choose not to conform in whatever accommodation they were provided with. In other words, they've been kicked out because they can't resist doing drugs or alcohol. Is that true? Is that still where we are? So people moan a lot about rough sleepers. And it's always sort of been my understanding that actually in Taunton, everybody should have somewhere, and certainly around the pandemic, there was no reason for anybody to be on the streets. They were either begging and going home to somewhere at night, or they were on the streets because they'd been kicked out or refused to conform. So is that true? I'm presuming that we never give anybody a tent and say go rough sleep. But when we do have people rocking up in a tent, it causes angst in communities. And as councillors, we just report it in that there's somebody there, and all we get back is a message saying the outreach team are aware and are supporting. But what we never get back is any feedback at all. And sometimes as a councillor, you need to be able to say, and there's one recently near me, and I'm pretty sure that actually that person had family living in a nearby house, and for whatever reason, the family didn't want him actually on the premises. And they were supporting because they were seen travelling over there in their wellies first thing in the morning with a bag of fresh clothes and food. Yeah, so you can imagine Granny was looking out for him or something like that. But what we never get back is any feedback about what's actually happened in an individual case. And I just wondered whether that's standard procedure because those matters are confidential to that person, or whether there's any feedback that we can have as local councillors. I mean, you generally get the drift when they've moved on because people stop telling you about it, and and it's very difficult. But there's my sort of general sort of observations about rough sleeping. I mean, I don't think there's any point in us looking at strategy and scrutiny until we've got something to look at. But I guess that there will be key members who will be involved in the writing of the strategy, and I wouldn't expect that as an ordinary, scrutiny member to be involved. But it's just that where the rub is always where it is in your community, where people are moaning about it. I always say to people, is it a problem? Is there something that's antisocial about what they're doing? And some people just object to the fact that they're alive, I think. So it's always, I always try and sort of steer people onto a positive, but just to have some feedback along the line would probably help. Thank you.
So with feedback, I can feed that back to the team and make sure that you get feedback without breaching GDPR. But we can provide like a feedback there. So we do have different groups. So we've got creative solutions in every area. So that's the challenging clients that we can discuss move on options, because we find there's a lot of entrenched people rough sleeping, and there's also they've run out of options with accommodation providers. We're only limited to an amount of supported accommodation, and I think we all know it's quite hard to get high risk clients into that for support. And they've got multiple disadvantages there. And also when the outreach teams are going out into the community and speaking with people who are sleeping, they've got to build that relationship first, because there's a lot, like you said, you don't know, they might go back to Nan's or something. So it's building that relationship and trying to reconnect them back to their families that they can go back, or try and rebuild a relationship with supported accommodation if there's arrears or something, and trying to mend the relationships there. But definitely with feedback, I can feed that back to the team and make sure you're all updated on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Just wanted to answer about the tents thing. We don't give out tents. We do have some people who absolutely refuse to come in despite multiple engagement. In the last sweat, very cold weather recently, we had 2 people in Yeovil who, despite us working with them every day, trying to encourage them to come in, they wouldn't. So one of them we did offer a big bag, and we gave hot drinks and warm dry clothing, etc. But we don't give out tents because, for the very reasons you say, it does tend to attract a lot of unwanted attention. We did give out a few during the pandemic when there were certain rules about where we could bring people into when we did the everyone in, and some people refused to come into the hotel because they needed to be kept separate.
with COVID, we did give out some tents in that very rare circumstance, but it wasn't, it didn't really work very well. No. We don't give out tents. We do get reports sometimes from the rangers in Yeovil Country Park, for example, that people are sleeping in tents, and we will go out and feed them and try and sort of encourage them not to. On very rare occasions, if there's antisocial behaviour, etc., the rangers will put a notice on the tent saying that the tent will be removed, and people's possessions will be brought to us, and then they know where to come and get. But yeah, we absolutely don't give out tents in the area.
Thank you. Dawn.
So thank you very much for all the work you do for some of the most vulnerable people in society. I've got a few questions. My first one was of the 57 households sleeping rough, how they are placed across Somerset. Are there hotspot areas of people sleeping rough? So that's the first question. When it comes to prevention, what are the main factors that you perceive as preventing people ending up rough sleeping on the streets? What do you have resource to do to preventive action, if that makes sense? Sorry, very garbled. Is it about providing a house, or is it much more? And what proportion is about housing, and what proportion is about other stuff that you need to do? The other question I had was, we've got a lot of information here about the models that you're looking at and how to provide housing. I know, the movement is very much away from hostel-based environments into housing-first models or modular-based units where you could provide pods. I'd be interested to hear, if you've started doing housing-first models, are you getting rough sleepers into housing-first premises? What happens if they stop engaging? How do you then deal with that if you've got somebody in a housing first property who's not engaging anymore? And are you looking at some of these modular pods that people are using in many places now, where they're setting up people just with a roof over their head in a site? And there's various different models of how those look. Sometimes they're just literally a caravan or a pod of some sort where people have a roof over their head. I just wonder if you're looking at any of those. One thing I would urgently stress, having had a really tricky experience in my community with Cannons Grove, is please come back to this scrutiny community if there's anything you're doing that involves our communities, because it has huge impact for councillors and people working in their communities when things are suddenly announced or put in place. And I, totally accept the reasoning why Cannons Grove was set up. It's just a plea that if you have got any schemes where you are going to be placing people, that you really appreciate the impact on communities and do that communication work with communities. So that's when I would like to see something coming to scrutiny if you are having plans to do anything on a bigger scheme level. Thank you.
Good start those in reverse. So growth, we have been using the housing first model. We purchased 3 properties in the west, and we added 5 of the council's own stock in the west and dedicated them to the housing first model. We're still looking to see if we can extend that number. That funding is coming to an end. 22 coming up in the east as well, 18 at the moment. So the housing first model is established. There's another bid gone in for the Homes in England funding as well to try and expand that through partners, so it doesn't have to be delivered at all through ourselves. So there is some work being done on that, and that's for the most complex of customers. We've put into the housing revenue account business plan 24 units of modular construction for low complex need customers. These could be from homelessness, or they could be from children's services. They are trying to move on accommodation. So you should start to see next year some of these coming forward and start being used. We've got some images that will show you when we do present the growth issue. So we are trying to work. We've got a long way to go on making sure we understand and deliver well our accommodation ourselves, as well as how adults and children's services use a lot of accommodation. We need to join that together and get even more value out to the partners. But we are using our resources. We have got this started, and for our rough sleepers as well as our homelessness, we are working hard to deliver more. Just start with prevention. So there's two areas of prevention. So with the prevention for general homeless or people who approach us, often they're in accommodation at the time. So therefore, there's a lot more we can do with them and more options, more things to talk to them about how they can return their accommodation, how they can prevent becoming homeless, how they can do things themselves to actually make sure that they avoid it. With rugby sleeping, it's far more acute, and pass over to Thursday to sort of talk on what we can do when those good sleepers are actually homeless. But a lot of that prevention work will be where people are still housed. We've got to try and make sure that they don't lose that accommodation, and then we have the responsibility.
So with Housing First, you mentioned what would we do if they stop to engage? So Housing First obviously put the person in the house and put wrapping around that support. So if they are stopping engaging, it might be that they work well with other agencies or having, but it's not that we wouldn't turn our back on them. We would just wait until they're ready, and there would be a reason why they're maybe not engaging. But we had someone entrenched for us sleeping move into a property, and they're doing absolutely amazing when they don't want any support, anything. They've actually got into the home and realised they do want the support, and it's working really well for them. So also with prevention, so actually the hotspot, I've got a hotspot in Taunton at the moment. I don't know what it is. No one wants to move. They just want to be in Taunton. They don't want to go out of the area. I think Open Door is amazing, but it provides showers, hot foods, and that's what draws people there. With the prevention, obviously, the main factors we've got with the RSI funds, we've got a personalised budget to help people off the street. So that's personalised to them. We've also got a private rented sector budget that can help with rent in advance to get them off the street. And obviously, we're working with other support and agencies, so the homeless nursing team, to try and factor them into a way off the streets. Sorry, I can't remember. Yeah, and Jans just said that East has also got a high number of rough sleepers as well. I don't know if you want to add on to that, Jan.
Really big too. East and West have got a very high flow of rough sleepers. All areas have got a high flow of returning rough sleepers. Not everyone is new to the streets, and returning rough sleepers is because of not enough of the right kind of accommodation, not enough of the right level of support to wrap around people with very, very complex needs. And what we normally would do is work, as Darcy said, in conjunction with other agencies to create an overall support package, but that doesn't always happen, or it isn't always an easy ask. And I think the reason that we have 50% plus returners, people who are struggling, the reason that people are attracted to different areas, partly the lack of accommodation pathways, so we're building on it. There is more accommodation needed right across the county that's specialised and specific to rough sleeping needs, particularly in the east and particularly in the west, I would say. And there is in the east an attraction to the area, a very rural attraction to vehicle dwellers and to rough sleepers, partly to do with Glastonbury. Mrs. Banner's smiling at me because we know the story well. It's partly the tolerant communities, it's partly philanthropic organisations and individuals who provide showers and laundries and food and food and so on. I think it's just a sign of times, economic sign of times, and socially as well. All services, adult social care, children's social care, they're seeing more and more people with complex needs. The numbers going up in all of our services. So that's sort of the picture. It's getting harder and easier.
One thing I would just add about the prevention, we do sort of continually try new things in our services to try and address needs that come up. So, for example, prison releases, that used to be a real issue, particularly in South, for people being released from prison on a Friday with no warning, and they would come to us, but we have no solutions for them. We just didn't have time. So we've secured funding in South and now the North for prison specialist prison release workers. And they work up with people up to a couple of months before their release date. So they'll meet them in prison, either virtually or on site, and discuss their accommodation for them, what's going to happen to them when they come out, so that they line up suitable accommodation for when they're released. And the same with hospital discharge workers. Again, at Pettus, we used to get people literally turning up in a taxi straight from hospital, often still in their hospital gown with no notice, and we really struggled to sort them out quickly. But now we've got the hospital discharge workers, they're on the wards, they're discussing with people what their plans are for when they come out. So we're always trying new things. It's certainly in our area, we no longer have those last minute dramas because we've got those workers who are doing that front. As new needs come up, we apply for funding and we get more people to do that sort of specialist work. So I think, you know, the picture changes all the time, and we're always trying to try new things.
Just in thing to add is that as a homeless service, generically, we got funding into very many prevention schemes. So low cost plans for deposits and rental funds, and lots of services like that where services to help people build tenancy skills, to help them sustain tenancies. So prevention is all about tenancy sustainment, or helping people to find an alternative new home before they lose the one that they're in because they're facing an eviction for whatever the reasons are. And if there are legal complications around that, for the teams to help the household through those legal complications. And ultimately, just coming back to something that Chris said at the beginning, prevention is absolutely the key to homelessness. This is the foundation stone of tackling homelessness. It doesn't mean that you can eradicate the impact of homelessness because life is very complicated. We are literally 2.5 paychecks away from being homeless.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Dawn wants to come back on a particular point there. What I would say is we are running quite late at the moment. I've got 3 other councillors who wish to speak, so if we could keep the questions reasonably brief and the answers reasonably brief, we can move on because we've still got one more item on the agenda. So thank you. Dawn?
Yeah, I just wanted to hear confirmation that Housing First is the model that you will be developing because you feel it works well for people, and that would be really good to hear. The other thing I just would be remiss not to mention is when somebody is sleeping in the community, it's very hard to find the right people to speak to and what the advice is. We had someone recently in my area and police were batting us back to the council were batting us back to the police. The people were saying, don't give them this person food. I think there'd be a valuable thing if you can get out some guidance on how that should be managed. Thank you.
So just to confirm, Housing First is a model that we use, so and we'll expand that. It's not necessarily a low cost one, but we can find when we do it. Secondly, we do have a members' question and answer document. We'll recirculate that again, and that actually does share the contact details both for rough sleeping, homelessness, and home finder.
Thank you. That'd be fantastic. Thanks, Chris. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief. Firstly, thank you to the rough sleepers team, because every time I've reported something in, you've dealt with it the same day, and not always successfully on the first visit, but you've always had a go on the first day, which is always grateful. We've got an ongoing problem. I think I know what the answer is because we've run out of options and we've run out of places to go. But it's becoming an antisocial behaviour because this individual is in is on public right of way, and they're effectively holding a party most evenings with their chums, who then go off to their sleeping accommodation, leaving him with several tins of alcohol, by which time they've had a merry time. And the neighbours are getting increasingly distressed at what is happening, and seemingly nobody is able to deal with it. And now I realise fully that that is not the case. However, if you can't get them to engage with you, it's very, very difficult to help them to move on. That message is very difficult to impart to the neighbours when they are being impacted on every single evening at kids' tea time. So it's becoming an issue.
Where's the location of this, Simon?
Eastridge.
And where?
Eastridge.
Just, the answer is that Stacey's team and other teams are very good at intervening early, going and seeing the individuals. Sometimes they can help, sometimes it is an iterative process over a couple of days. If they feel that they are getting not very far, the regulations team will support, and there are powers that can be used. So ideally, we find out if we can help, whether we can advise, and then if there needs to be more stronger action, there have been a number of successes, I know, within the unitary authority of where we've used regulation.
May I come back? Yes. I think we need to do that. We're talking about that forum.
Tom Councillor.
Okay, thanks very much. Hazel, then Dawn Deputy, and I'll wind this session up.
Thank you. Interesting your comment about open door, and I in the past had quite a lot of dealings with open door, and there's always, and I suppose in Taunton, lots of people will say, oh well, Taunton Association for Homeless, or whatever they're called now, or it's not any Taunton. You know, everybody comes to Taunton because there is provision, but if you look at it like, you know, what are people supposed to do? They want to help, and they're trying to help and trying to be altruistic in making provision. And what would be the alternative to these people? Many of them would have died on the streets if they hadn't been helped. So there's always that balance to be had. And I presume that you work along with whatever Taunton Association for Homeless is called these days. Thank you. And that's one of the providers, because they provide a huge service. And I don't know what happened with Norwich House, because that was a unit that was set up specifically for rough sleepers. And I don't think it's used for that anymore. But, you know, maybe going back a few years. And I suppose the other thing we need to remember is that, you know, for people who are travellers, the definition of homelessness is not having anywhere to put the structure which you consider to be your home. So that's, and I don't know whether you are involved in the travel, that's completely separate. But there are lots of people who are in vans and things because they literally have nowhere else to be. And, you know, we've failed collectively as a group of councils, I believe, over the last decade, two decades, decade and a half, to actually address this issue and to be able to get satisfactory provision for lots of these people. And until somebody grabs the bull by the horns and says, we are absolutely going to do something about this, because everybody's needing to know the banana, you know, don't want it here, send them somewhere else. And we can't go on in this situation. And there will always be areas that are attracted to people, because people tend to form in their community because they do it for safety and companionship. And it's very difficult to break that kind of cycle. So I think, you know, I don't know whether you're involved in the Gypsy Travellers thing or whether that's completely separate, but that's, you know, a piece of work I think we do need to get to grips with. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll probably deal with Gypsies and Travellers on another occasion, but I mean, it's all.
Well, it's good,
yeah, it's all there.
There is quite a lot of work going into the non-bricks and mortar community as we call them, including development and traveller finding. Not enough, but there is activity going on, and we do have in the east, because of the Glastonbury problem, a specialist housing advisor who works with that group, as well as the homeless help team.
I think that members are not cited on that work, because every time I've said, oh, I think that'd be really, you know, oh, well, no, it's all right, it's worked out, but as members, we're not abreast of what is happening in respect of those things. So I keep asking a question about a particular site in the, what was Somerset West Taunton area,
asking, has it been sold? And I never get a double straight answer, and frankly, I've given a party because I'm tired of not getting an answer. But I think that members are not aware of what is going on. I think that we're not aware enough of all the things that are happening. I'm sure there are lots of things happening, but as members, we don't know what they are. I mean, you may do if you're the lead member or an associate member, or I don't know, but I'm in the dark, and I would really be interested to know. And I don't think we have enough of that basic, you know, it's always sort of closed in shrouded in mystery, and I don't like mysteries.
Okay, I mean, I think that's something Chris and I can talk about in future to sort of try and make sure there is a little bit more information and about going on about the other things across the piece, if that's, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, very happy to do a members briefing and we can expand on some of the issues which were relevant.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Dawn Ted.
Thank you. I'm just thrilled about the not waiting for 3 days to trigger, because I think that I've often, you know, sat at home thinking, why do we need 3 nights of cold to be, you know, not looked after? I'm also just curious about the definition of, the official definition of rough sleeping. Is that something that is a certain time period, or can the support trigger before it becomes, I know that's the ideal, but what would be the definition of taking it from hopelessness to rough sleeping?
So there is a definition on, I think it's homelessness, and do a definition. It is someone that's bedded down in like a public place. So we would go from that definition, but we would not close our services off if someone has got a history of rough sleeping. We wouldn't just say no, but if they're verified rough sleeping, it means that our outreach teams have gone out and verified them bedded down and sleeping rough. And I don't think you will cover in the chat.
Yeah, well, so people are still rough sleeping if they're sleeping in a car, but not in a converted vehicle. They're rough sleeping if they're sleeping in a shed or some sort of shelter that they've made, like a bash, we would call it, as well as a tent or with no tent, just in a sleeping bag. That is all rough sleeping. Nobody chooses to rough sleep in the first place, but it can become a safe world for people who become entrenched in it. And with vehicle dwelling, we observe that a percentage of all the vehicle dwellers are living in vans that are worse than rough sleeping, using the elements, using vermin, no heating, people being exploited. Not all of them, a lot of vehicle dwellers are choosing a lifestyle and have got use of the vehicles and decent jobs, but there is an element. So we have agreed with DLUC to pilot a policy which we're both working on with them around what you can class as an uninhabitable lived in vehicle, because they're not. No. We have a chap who's got infections from rat bites because he can't keep the rats out of his vehicle. That's rough sleeping. That's even better. That's worse than somebody sleeping in a car or a shed. So we will work with DLUC on this, but it will push our rough sleeping numbers even higher once we identify, and that's a good word, it's going on the east, because we've got around about 300 indicatively non-bricks and mortar cars living in lived-in vehicles in and around Glastonbury, which has a population of less than 9,000. We have the highest density outside of Bristol of vehicle dwellers in the country. Bristol have got around 900 now. Their numbers of escalated individuals their numbers have escalated in the last 2 years. But look at the size of Bristol, look at the population of Bristol, look at little Glastonbury and the surrounding rural area. So there is a lot of work, but we'll do a brief then about the strategic work that's been happening to try to tackle it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, because I'm assuming there is a significant difference between what you might call the gypsy and traveller community and the people who live in the vans. So different solutions for different issues. Yes, Suzanne.
Well, just one quite depressing thing I'd like to add about these people who are deploying in these vans. Somebody, and I don't know who, and for some reason, I don't know, somebody or a couple of people are actually renting these vans out for between 50 and 100, from what I've been told, £100 a week. And when the rent isn't paid, the vans are torched. That has happened repeatedly. That has happened many times. I have the misfortune to live very close to it. I can't even keep count of how many times the fire brigade have had to come down to deal with it. And in fact, the fire brigade actually told me over a year ago that they had said it was not even safe for them to go down those areas anymore because it was so difficult to get past the vehicles that are parked up there that they're risking their fire engines. So they now have actually said, we can't attend this most time.
Thank you for that, certainly.
Yeah, very good.
Piece to end on. Chris and colleagues, thank you very much for coming along. You're obviously working very, very hard on this. We look forward to seeing the strategy as it evolves. I think if you could give us a briefing on the wider briefing, that would be very helpful. You and I can talk about when would be an appropriate time to bring the strategy back to us. That'd be great. In the meantime, thank you very much for coming in. Sorry, we're overrunning, so we'll move on to the next item. Which is item 8, the HRA Housing Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring Report. Kerry Trisco, I think, is online. Kerry?
Hello, thank you. Is it okay if I go ahead and share my screen?
Should be able to get it now.
Sorry, just trying to share. I'm not sure it's letting me. Is Paul Matravers still in the room? If I share with you, are you able to share, please? I can't seem to make it share from here. I've just sent it now.
Do you want to try again? I've just changed the settings on you.
Yeah,
you weren't as an attendee, so it wasn't letting you share. But if you do it, if you try again now.
The share button's not available.
Yeah, I think I've just switched it, so you should be able to now.
No, it's greyed
No.
out.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I've just shared the document with Paul Matravers. I'm hoping he'll be able to share on screen.
Bear with me.
I don't know. The new venue communes plan. He needs to be a presenter, which is what he is. Yeah, so that should be fine.
Excellent. Thank you, Sana. Apologies for the delay in presenting to you this afternoon. So this is the HRA, so the Housing Revenue Accounts Budget Monitoring position as of month 6. On the next slide, you'll see a table which, and again. you've got the wrong slides there. I think my share button's just come back. Let me just see if I can now click.
I've made you a presenter now. You should be able to share yourself.
Are you able to see on screen now a revenue slide with a table?
Yeah.
Apologies, thank you very much. Okay, so what you're going to see here for the housing revenue account, the position as of month 6, looking at just from a revenue perspective, the forecast outturn is looking to be likely possibly a 2 million overspend. The main reason for this overspend is focusing on the maintenance part of the service. So they're forecasting about a 1.8 million overspend. This is mainly to do with kind of voids repairs and also general repairs. They're seeing an increase in demand at the moment, so approximately 22% increase year to date for voids and about 31% for responsive repairs. They are doing a number of different things to help mitigate that variance and to try and bring that back down. They're investing in their kind of leaving well schemes. That's about working with and supporting tenants to leave their properties in a more suitable manner to try and reduce the time and cost of works required to bring that property back to a lettable standard before we can relet that. They're also undertaking a bit of a procurement exercise at the moment to test the market to see if they can get an external contractor in to support the voids repairs. And they're also doing a comprehensive review of kind of cost allocation. And what I mean by that is it's looking at the difference between what's a revenue cost and what's a capital cost. So if the voids team go in to bring a property back up to lettable standard, they may initially go in and think it's a minor repair, whereas actually it turns out that perhaps a kitchen needs replacing. Well, actually the cost of the kitchen can be capitalised. So we're just making sure that costs have been allocated correctly between revenue and capital. And looking at the kind of the variance, there is a possibility so part of that 1.8 will be brought back down further because there probably is some capital spend kind of within the revenue cost at the moment, but we're just trying to work through that detail before we could say for certain that is the case. There's a few minor variances on dwelling rents. So this is just looking at how much kind of rental income we're receiving against budget. So our budget is set, it's very much estimated. So we're just looking at under recovery of about 100k at the moment. And this could be to do with timings of stock changes and levels of voids. There's also a small variance of 78k, so under recovery on leaseholder income. And this is because this is invoiced in arrears and the repairs were lower than expected and there are a few Section 20s not in place. But going forwards, the service is ensuring that Section 20s are in place and trying to kind of predict those with possibly a bit more accuracy. But as I said, it's in arrears, so the timing there means that we're never going to be able to get that exactly right at all. On the next slide, please, we are looking at general reserves. So if the outturn position ends up being an overspend, there we go, sorry. If the position is an overspend of 2 million, I'm just showing here that from a general reserves perspective, we are able to finance that overspend by using our current levels of general reserves. And if that does happen, we are still able to stay above our minimum balance. So our minimum balance is about 3.7. And if we do overspend by 2 mil or thereabouts, it's still going to give us 6.2 of general reserves still contained within that area. From a capital perspective, I've got a number of slides just to kind of help you see that what we have done from the Q2 perspective is improved the information that we have available to present to yourselves following on from the last committee. So what the service has been able to do is actually profile, here we go, profile their capital spend. And what that means is they may have approved capital budget, but some of that will actually fall into future financial years. So Appendix D, for example, in the report, it shows that approximately 45 million is planned to be spent this financial year and about 76 million in future years. And most of that's due to the social development programmes like North Taunton, for example, is a big one. Well, that's kind of programmed to spend over a number of years. On a positive perspective, in terms of how we're actually financing our capital programme, we've had some good news. The service was successful in obtaining a 5 million grant from Homes England, and that will help to subsidise a regeneration scheme where we're replacing 1-for-1, and that reduces our initial reduces our borrowing requirement that we initially thought we had when we set the budget. In terms of profiled spend, you can see that the forecast, I was trying to slide across, apologies. Here we go. So in terms of the forecast outturn on the capital programme, against our estimated target about 45 mil, they're proposing about 40 mil at the moment, so about 5 mil underspend. The majority of that is to do with slippage on the major works programme, and that's to do with timing of kind of procurement and contractors and access to properties and such like. In terms of key risks, future issues and opportunities, I've just provided a slide here to briefly highlight and summarise the content of the report. There's a lot in the report. That's because the HRA is heavily regulated. They've got a lot of compliance areas they have to deal with, naming kind of gas, electric, water, asbestos, fire safety, etc., including damp and mould. They've got new legislation coming into place around tenant satisfaction measures. So that's placing further kind of resource demands on the HRA service. Also operational delivery, so very demand led, as I mentioned about repairs and maintenance and uncontrollable variables. And then from an economic point of view, as you've probably heard from a general fund perspective, there's a lot around inflation, rising costs of borrowings that we're trying to kind of monitor and manage. So that's a very brief overview of the Q2 report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Right, thank you, Kerry. That's very, very interesting. Good to know that this part of the budget is in some sort of control. Are there any questions from members? Nobody online. I think, Chris, the two variances that were mentioned were the voids and some unrecovered rent, I think was from both leaseholds. Are we in a position to close that gap, or are they as you would expect at this time of the year? I think at the pre-meeting you mentioned that the void expenses were higher than normal, and is that a blip, or is that down to increased costs in dealing with them, or are tenants becoming less and less careful?
Okay, so I think what we do need to do before Q3 report is to make sure we do a bit more of a deep dive on the finances, to make sure there's no duplication between POs and cost coding. That we found last year was a significant issue, so we do need to do that deep dive, which we haven't had the capacity to do to date. Because the 31% increase in repairs, I'm not feeling that from staff. You know, I would be expecting to see people at my door saying I'm working flat out, or twice as flat out as normal maybe. So you know, I'm not quite sure if the repair aspect 31% is based on actual jobs and time, or whether it's based on what the system is telling us, which we might need to scrutinise. We will need to scrutinise more before the next report. Voids, yes, we have got a lot of voids. We have different types of voids. We have the minors and the majors, which are just to do with standard turnover of stock when tenants leave, and we get them ready. It's fair to say that the capital programme, but the void service is finding more major voids because the capital programme needs to pick up pace. This will take a little while to catch up. So kitchen programmes, bathroom programmes, standard things which customers we need to replace when they are very tired at a void stage. We need to start moving towards a capital programme which is able to mean that voids team inherits better property, and therefore more of the voids are minor. A bit long-winded that, but basically they have more work to do and they have quite a lot of properties. We can't necessarily do anything about turnover, but we can do something about making sure they inherit a property to improve swifter. We also do have some work to do on just making sure we're capturing those costs as well as we can do around void works. So voids is definitely a challenge. There's another type of void as well, which is to do with regeneration. So we know certain parts like North Taunton, and there's some within the homes in Sedgemoor stock, which are longer term. They've got specific challenges. So we're working on those specific challenges so that we can close those voids down. So regeneration work at North Taunton, there's going to be quite a lot of demolition between February and April. Wordsworth and Coleridge Crescent in Taunton, those properties will also be demolished. That means that our void figures will come down because of that, artificially high. There are a few challenges with extra care, to be fair, as well. So we're working on making sure we manage those and get the nominations correctly for the extra care. So these things working together are likely to give us a better picture from the start of next year. There is an action plan around the minor and major voids, quite a comprehensive one, and happy to bring that back to scrutiny at some point to say how well that is proceeding. So it is a key area, is to make sure those voids are minimised. The speed at which we get them back into rent is quick. I think the rent figure was about £100,000 shortfall. This year, both the homes in Sedgemoor generally do extremely well at collecting rent and are continuing that. The in-house service is also collecting rent at a higher rate this year than previous years. We've got to keep that up, it's very key. And we've also got to do more around our making sure our service charges are collected appropriately and that we minimise any subsidy that we're doing inappropriately in the system. I think we've got some learning to do, somewhere to go there.
I think you said in the pre-meeting that one of the reasons the renewal or the replacement programme was slightly out of kilter was because of the time lost over COVID when you couldn't go to people's houses and things like that. And so when you say you're sorting out a new programme, are you having a new programme or are you just kick-starting the old one?
I think it's fair to say that COVID, as well as the focus on compliance, has taken a lot of capacity or didn't allow us to deliver a lot of the not decent homes work, but the capital programmes in the way that we would have wanted to do. Both those things have come to an end, really. We've got one managed compliance programme at the moment. We should be able to focus on making properties decent and making sure we're delivering those kitchens, bathrooms, rooms, etc. In higher numbers. It will be limited in effect until that seeps through for the voids team. But we need to make sure that we do spend the capital programme and make sure that properties are replacements made at the right time. So I think COVID has something to do with it, where we couldn't get into properties and we had to slow down or stop. Also, our focus on compliance over the last 3 years has been significant. Going forward, though, we've done a lot of the compliance work. We should get back on track with the capital programmes.
Okay, thank you. Well, I look forward to the Q9 report, which will tidy up some of the information on how to do Dawn Johnson.
Thank you. So I understand the HRA is a ring-fenced account, but there are obviously things that the council do that impact on your business. And I'm still not quite understanding how it works. So we have any spend over £100 at the council is being, put to a board. Presumably that's not happening with the HRA, or it is happening with the HRA. So any spend or budget streamlining that could be done is still the same expectation. That's good to hear, thank you. The other thing is things like the council house reduction scheme. How do you measure the impact of those sort of things within your ring-fence HRA budgeting? There are things that the council decide to do which impact on your revenues, and I'm just not clear how that then gets reflected.
Terry may be able to as well, but we do have service level agreements and they work both ways between the housing revenue account purchasing services from the general fund, and the general fund purchase some services from the HRA. So there are a few things that the HRA do for the general fund, and it's DLO, for example, it's direct labour organisation, might help putting in lampposts and doing all sorts of things for royal visits or royal occasions and things like that. There are some crossovers around flooding and such as well. I think it's sometimes being precise in capturing the data and making sure recharges are appropriate, but it does work both ways. So if there are significant costs which the HRA incur, which are general fund costs, we will try and identify those, and we need to try and recharge those because that's fair to the tenant. Likewise, if we are using services of the general fund, which we do, and there's a sizable amount of money which is paid from the HRA to the general fund, that happens, and there are service level agreements to actually clarify how much that is and what it's for. So the ring fencing does work, but we do have to be clear on what we are charging one way or another, so we don't corrupt it.
Yeah, so very specifically then, with the council tax reduction scheme, how does that impact on your revenue predictions? It doesn't.
Sorry, I don't know. I don't know if you can help me with this.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So thank you, councillor. So in terms of the council tax reduction scheme, just to clarify that the individual tenants, they take on their own liabilities directly with regards to paying their council tax bills or their utility bills, for example. So in terms of council tax, the only impact that the HRA revenue budget has is for void properties. And just to note that from the 1st of April this financial year, there was like a couple of months discount, I believe it's whatever it's called, but the empty property discount, the number of months that we were eligible to have has actually been removed, and for any members that were part of South Western Council before would have been made aware of that as part of that decision-making process. So just to clarify, the only cost to the HRA budget is for void properties from a council tax perspective, and we will need to incur that from day one because the discount period for empty properties has been removed from the 1st of April this financial year. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions either in the room or online? No? Right, well, thank you, Chris, for that, and thank you, Kerry, for your description of where the budget is. We look forward to seeing the third quarter papers in due course. I don't think there are any particular recommendations other than to note the report and ask any pertinent questions, which I think we've done. So we can thank you and move on to the last item on the agenda, which I want to deal with relatively quickly, which is the scrutiny programme. We've got on the programme, you see we've got agenda items for the next 2 meetings. That's the community service budget update, which is a standing item these days. And we're looking at street scene contracts, growth of the new housing supply, which Chris will be back with us again. He seems to, he'll give you a regular seat, Chris. And the cultural strategy, which is coming forward, and that will be just before it goes to executive, I think. And then there's play parks and green spaces briefing. We had a discussion in the agenda setting about these. I think we recognise that probably these 5 items may be too much for a meeting, so we will look at what we can do to either manage them better within the meeting or possibly postpone, but that's where we are at the moment. Are there any other items that you think we should be looking at that are not on the February agenda or the April agenda? No? Okay. Well, thank you all very much for your time in this whole coming. I'm sorry we've overrun. So I hope everybody gets home safely.
Thank you.